The guard spat and said the Baron just wouldn't die, which was a shame because the silk shirt was going to waste. He lay in that cart, in a stranger's young body, listening to them discuss his death, and then something clicked inside his chest, and 112 dying people flashed up as dots on a map inside his head. The first thing he feels are someone else's legs, bony, dirty, stinking so badly he wants to stop breathing. They're lying on his stomach. Lee Hajun opens his eyes and sees a sky the color of dirty tin. The cart is shaking. The wheels creak over every bump. He struggles to sit up, but his body won't obey. It's not his. Thinner, younger. His hands are soft, like those of a man who has never held a shovel. On his finger is a heavy ring with a character he doesn't recognize. Nearby, a girl of about 8 is crying. She presses an empty bowl to her chest as if there were still something left in it. He turns his head. 4 more carts stretch out behind his. People are lying in a heap, the old people at the bottom, the children between them. The smell of unwashed bodies and sour fear hangs so thick you could cut it with a knife. 10 days at least, maybe 12. He knows this smell. He worked in it for 7 years, a refugee camp on wheels, and it seems he's in charge here. The thought comes to him in the Korean of his past life, as familiar as morning coffee. Old people at the bottom means we've been going a long time. Children without shoes. Wherever it takes him, this is his job. He's done this before. He'll do it again. And then it clicks in his chest again, not in his head, under his ribs on the left, quiet and precise. A translucent inscription floats before his eyes, in a language he doesn't know, but for some reason can read. The seal of living subjection is activated. Subjects, 0 out of 112, 0 loyal. Resource empty. He exhales, sits up straighter, and feels them. Not thoughts, not faces. A state. 112 dim dots on a map unfolding inside his skull. All hungry. At least 9 sick. 2 on the brink. 1 in very bad shape. The old man in the last cart fades like a dying candle. The girl stops crying. She looks up at him with wet eyes, because the adult next to her finally looks as if he knows what to do. He counts the guards. 6, on horseback, leather armor, short swords, not soldiers, escorts, the kind sent to accompany those no one cares about. The convoy sets up camp for the night by a dried-up riverbed. People are unloaded like sacks. No one sets up camp. No one builds a fire. The guards eat separately and don't share. And Lee Hajun stands there counting. 112 people, 30 men capable of working, a little over 40 women, nearly 30 children, 3 old men, 2 sacks of millet in the last cart, 1 cow tied to the side, 8 axes wrapped in oiled cloth, a letter of grant in a chest under the driver's seat. He knows these kinds of calculations. He's seen them in reports. When the camp budget is slashed to 0 and the report says the contingent will be provided for, the contingent won't be provided for. The contingent will die by winter, and everyone knows it. Only here, the contingent isn't a line in a report. Here, it's a girl with an empty bowl, an old man whose eye is still twitching, 30 men sitting by a dry riverbed, staring at the ground because they've already decided this is the end. A gray-haired man approaches him, strong, muscular, a former soldier. You can tell by the way he holds his back. He introduces himself as Grandpa Kim. He asks if the Baron needs anything. His voice is steady, but his eyes tell a different story. His eyes say that he has already buried this Baron in his mind, and is figuring out who will be in charge when the Baron kicks the bucket. Lee Hajun looks at the riverbed, at the people, and says one thing. Tomorrow we'll dig a well. Grandpa Kim blinks. He says there's no water for 20 miles around. He served here when he was young. He knows. Lee Hajun nods. He says he knows that too, and that tomorrow they'll dig a well. Then he walks over to the girl with the bowl. He sits down next to her. He asks her name. She says it's Suni. He says that tomorrow there will be porridge in that bowl. Suni looks at him for a long time. Then she nods, not because she believes him, but because it's been a long time since anyone even promised her that. He lies down on the ground and closes his eyes. 112 dots flicker in his head. Dim, hungry, frightened, but alive. Every single one. And he begins to count. 2 sacks of millet mean 40 days on starvation rations. A cow means milk for children and the elderly. 8 axes are tools. 112 people are a workforce. The Dead Steppe is a problem. Winter is the deadline. 90 days until the first snow. In Kutupalong, he set up camp for 20,000 people in 14 days. Without magic, without crystals, without the seal in his chest. With UN bureaucracy that's worse than any nomadic raid. Here he has 112 people. That's 178 times fewer. He'll manage. He has to. The morning dawned gray and cold. Lee Hajun woke up when the light in the last wagon flickered and went out. He sat up with a start. The old man, the very one who was on the brink yesterday. Lee Hajun got up and walked to the last wagon. People parted. They didn't know his name yet. To them, he was the Baron. That very useless Baron who had been exiled to die alongside them. The old man lay at the bottom of the wagon. He wasn't breathing. A woman in her 40s sat nearby. His daughter, judging by the way she held his hand. She wasn't crying. She had no strength left for tears. Lee Hajun stood nearby, silently. Then he knelt down and closed the old man's eyes. He told the woman they would bury him properly. The woman looked up at him. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only emptiness. Grandfather Kim stood behind him. He watched. Lee Hajun turned to him and said they needed 4 men with shovels, a grave on high ground so it wouldn't flood in the spring. Grandfather Kim nodded, not because he respected the Baron, because the order was right. They buried him quickly. Lee Hajun remembered. 111 dots, the first loss. He couldn't let a second one happen. After the funeral, he gathered everyone who could stand, about 70 people. The rest were lying in carts. He stood before them and spoke, briefly. He said he knew. They had been sent away to die. Nobody cared about them. There was no water, food for 40 days, winter in 3 months. By all accounts, they were dead men walking. People listened, not because they believed him, because no one else spoke to them as if they were alive. He said he had a plan, not a grand one, not a pretty one, a plan for today. Today they would dig a well. Tomorrow, they would build a shelter. The day after tomorrow, they'll start building dugouts. 1 task a day, not 2, not 10, 1. Whoever wants to help, helps. Whoever can't, rests. No one is forced. No one is beaten. He fell silent. Silence. Then a man stepped out of the crowd, broad-shouldered, a scar across his left eyebrow. Corporal Cho Byung-hoo. You could tell he was a former soldier by everything, his posture, his hands, the way he looked at things, sizing them up. Cho Byung-hoo said that words were fine, but you didn't dig wells with words. He asked where to dig. Lee Hajun nodded. He led him to the hillside by the dry riverbed. He sat down on the ground. For 10 minutes, he stared silently at the slope. People stood around and waited. They thought the Baron had gone mad. Lee Hajun asked Grandpa Kim for his old pipe. He tapped out the ash. He sniffed the ground. He poked at the roots of the dry grass with a knife. Then he stood up and explained. Kuchan wormwood used to grow here. Its roots go down 7 chi. This wormwood only grows where water stood in the winter. The water didn't go into the ground. It went under the rock. We need to dig not by the riverbed, but over there, under the ledge, diagonally. Grandpa Kim looked at him as if he were crazy, but he ordered them to dig, because it couldn't get any worse. 4 of them dug, Cho Byung-hoo and 3 men from the Deaders. The ground was hard, rocky, the shovels clanged. They switched shifts after an hour, then another hour later. Lee Hajun stood nearby and watched. He didn't help dig, not because he was lazy, his body just couldn't handle it. A delicate Baron with soft hands, but he stood there, and that was what mattered. He didn't leave, nothing at a depth of 2 meters. Cho Byung-hoo climbed out of the hole and looked at Lee Hajun, silently. His gaze said it all, as if to say, I knew it. A pointless endeavor by a pointless Baron. Lee Hajun told him to dig another meter. Cho Byung-hoo spat. He climbed back down. At a depth of 3 meters, the shovel sank into wet sand. Cho Byung-hoo froze. He scooped up a handful. The sand was dark, heavy, damp. He looked up at Lee Hajun, for the first time without contempt, with something else. Not respect yet, surprise. By evening they had a well, murky, cold water, sweeter than anything in the lives of 111 people. Grandpa Kim drank first. His hands weren't shaking, for the first time in a week. The children drank after the elders, then the women, then the men. Lee Hajun drank last, and when he took his first sip, something clicked in his chest again. Warm, quiet. A small crystal fell into his palm, the size of a finger joint, transparent with a faint blue glow, warm as if alive. Lee Hajun clenched it in his fist. The inscription before his eyes updated. Subjects, 1 of 111. Loyal, 0. Resource, 1 crystal. 1. Grandpa Kim, the first person to get better, the first person whose hands stopped shaking. Lee Hajun looked at the crystal, then at Grandpa Kim, then at the 110 dots that were still flickering dimly and hungrily. 1 crystal is 1 day's work for a healthy man. 110 hungry people. 90 days until winter. The math is simple and cruel. He needs more, much more. But right now, at this moment, they have water, and that means they have tomorrow. At night, he lay on the ground and looked up at the sky. The stars were foreign, not a single familiar constellation. A different sky, a different world, a different body. But the task is the same. People without water, people without food, people without shelter, and him, between them and death, as always. The girl, Suni, approached him in the darkness. She sat down beside him. She pressed her bowl to her chest. Now there was water in it. She said quietly that the Baron hadn't lied. Lee Hajun nodded. He said he wouldn't lie tomorrow either. Suni lay down beside him and fell asleep. The tiny dot on his map, once dim, grew a little brighter, just a tiny bit, like a flame that someone had shielded from the wind with their palm. Lee Hajun closed his eyes. Tomorrow, a shelter. The day after tomorrow, dugouts. 1 task each day. He fell asleep, and for the first time in this world, slept without dreams. One of the old men died during the night, and Lee Hajun buried him and addressed the people with a simple plan for each day. A well was dug according to his instructions and yielded water. The first crystal of well-being appeared, tied to Grandpa Kim. On the 3rd day, Lee Hajun realized that the millet would run out faster than he had expected. 2 sacks for 111 mouths. He counted again. 30 days, not 40, 30. Because the 2 sick men with bloody diarrhea were getting double portions of thin porridge. Because the children ate more often. Because the men digging dugouts were burning calories that couldn't be replenished. He sat down by the well and began to think. The seal pulsed in his chest, quietly and steadily. A single crystal lay in his pocket. 1. Useless. What to do with it? He concentrated and tried to ask a question, not an abstract one, a concrete one. Millet for 30 days, 111 people, the Dead Steppe. What can be eaten? Nothing happened. He tried a different approach. Grandpa Kim coughs in the mornings. He needs a hot decoction. What can be used to make it in this steppe? A diagram flashed before his eyes, not on paper, semi-transparent. A diagram of the root system of some plant. Names in a language he didn't know but could read. Bitter root, grows in crevices between rocks on the northern slopes. Brew with boiling water, soothes a cough and warms you up. Lee Hajun stood up and walked toward the northern slope. 20 minutes later he found a crevice. A crooked, dry bush grew there. He dug up the root. He sniffed it. Bitter, pungent. He brought it back to camp. He brewed it in a cauldron that one of the craftsmen had assembled from sheet metal found in the supply train. Grandpa Kim drank it and stopped coughing within an hour. The second spot grew brighter. A second crystal fell into his palm. Warm. Lee Hajun understood the principle. The seal doesn't work on abstractions. It works on people. Not millet for the camp, but porridge for Suni. Not a dugout for everyone, but a roof for the widow Park, whose left hand doesn't work. He began going around to the people, one by one. He talked to them. He didn't ask what they could do, but what was hurting them. Who had back pain, who had knee pain, who couldn't sleep at night, who was coughing, who cried when they thought no one was watching. By evening, he knew each of the 111 by name, by their pain, by a point on the map. On the morning of the 4th day, he began building the first dugout, not for himself, for a family with 3 children under the age of 6, a mother, a grandmother, 3 girls. The father had died even before the exile. The printer spat out the blueprint when he formulated the task correctly. A dugout for a woman with 3 small children, an entrance on the south side so the wind wouldn't blow in, a chimney at an angle to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning, a sleeping platform raised a hand's width off the ground so the children wouldn't freeze from the earth. The blueprint was precise, with dimensions. taking into account the local clay and stone, as if someone had taken his knowledge from a past life and adapted it to this world. 7 of them dug. Cho Byung-hoo brought his men without being asked, in silence. They worked all day. By evening, the dugout was standing, small, low, warm. Mother went inside. She touched the walls. She looked at the sleeping platform. Then she turned to Lee Hajun and bowed to the floor. He told her not to bow. He said there would be a second dugout tomorrow, for Grandfather Kim. That night, the children slept without their outer clothes for the first time. 4 crystals appeared overnight, 3 from mother and grandmother, and 1 from the oldest girl, who was 5. Even the children gave crystals when they felt better. Lee Hajun sat at the entrance to his tent and counted 6 crystals in 4 days. Not much, but he understood the curve. Every person who is fed and warm is a source. Every source gives more when they feel good for longer. It takes 30 days of uninterrupted well-being for a person to become loyal. A loyal person gives crystals consistently. 6 crystals on the 4th day. By the 30th day, if everything is done right, it could be 50 a day. By the 60th, 200. An exponential curve. He knew how exponentials worked. He had seen how a camp in Bangladesh had grown from 5,000 to 80,000 in 3 months. The principle was the same. Feed the first ones. The first ones will help the second ones. The second group will help the third. After that, the system grows on its own. On the 5th day, he spent his first crystal. A painful decision. 6 crystals, and each one represents a day of someone's labor. But they were running out of firewood. The barren steppe yielded no wood, only dry bushes and roots. He took the crystal and formulated the task. A fire for the camp at night. Warm, smoke-free. The crystal crumbled between his fingers. A bonfire in the center of the camp flared up and burned steadily until dawn. No firewood, no smoke. Warm. People sat around it and were silent. They watched the fire, then at each other, then at the Baron, who sat among them and ate the same thin porridge from the same pot. Cho Byung-hoo sat down next to him. He asked quietly what kind of fire it was. Lee Hajun told the truth. The seal, the very one everyone thinks doesn't work. It works, but only if people are well. Cho Byung-hoo was silent for a long time. Then he said he didn't believe in magic, but he believed in a warm fire on a winter night, and that tomorrow his men would dig 3 dugouts instead of 1. On the 6th day, for the first time, no one cried at night. Lee Hajun lay there and sensed the map. 111 points. Half had grown brighter. Not all of them, but half. The 2 men suffering from diarrhea had recovered. The children slept in the warmth. The elders drank hot broth. The craftsmen began sharpening their axes without being told. Something was changing, slowly, quietly, like water seeping through stone. You can't see it, but it's there. It's working, moving, seeking a path downward. Lee Hajun realized that the seal only worked on specific people, not on abstract tasks. He went around to everyone and memorized their names and their pain. The first dugout was built, and the first crystal was spent on a smokeless fire. Cho Byung-hoo began helping voluntarily. On the 10th day, Grandpa Kim brought a guy in his 20s to him, skinny, hands covered in old burns, a blacksmith, or rather, a former blacksmith's apprentice. His name was Park Tae-seong. His master had died in a debtor's pit, and Tae-seong himself had been sent into exile because a blacksmith without a workshop is just a mouth to feed. Grandfather Kim said the guy was silent as a wall, but had the right hands. Lee Hajun looked at Tae-seong. Then he closed his eyes and listened to the seal. The boy's dot on the map was strange, not dim like those of the starving, nor bright like those of those who had fared better. It flickered, quickly and erratically, like the heartbeat of a man waiting for something. Lee Hajun asked him one thing: "What can you make from what you love?" Tae-seong was silent for a long time. Then he said he could make knives, not swords, not armor, knives, good ones, the kind that don't tire the hand. Lee Hajun nodded. He formulated a task for the seal, a smithy for Park Tae-seong, simple, without walls, a stone hearth, an anvil made of a boulder, bellows made of cowhide. The guy makes knives. The blueprint came instantly, detailed, with the placement of the stones and the angle of the hearth, with a note that the bog ore on the western side of the riverbed yields soft iron suitable for forging. Lee Hajun showed the blueprint to Hassan. Or rather, he described it in words because he was the only one who had seen the blueprint. Taesung listened, then he looked at his hands, then at the Baron, and for the first time in 10 days, he smiled. They spent 2 days building the smithy. The three of them hauled the stones, Taesung, Lee Hajun, and Cho Byung-hoo, who had come because he needed a knife for planing. On the 12th day, Taesung lit the first fire in his hearth. The bog ore from the west bank was exactly as Peach had said, soft, malleable. By evening, he had forged his first knife, rough, a bit crooked, but sharp. He held it in his palm and looked at it the way one looks at a child. Lee Hajun felt a resonance, a new sensation. When he stood next to Taesung and explained the principle of tempering, which he knew from his past life, the boy grasped it 3 times faster than he should have. The seal illuminated the process, not with magic. It simply showed Lee Hajun where to direct his words, what gesture to make, what detail to highlight. Taesung's talent with knives was like a bottomless well. He was just waiting for someone to show him where to dig. By the 14th day, the camp had changed. 5 dugouts, all warm, all with proper chimneys. The children weren't coughing. The sick had recovered. Lee Hajun gathered the men and showed them a blueprint for a large dugout, a communal one, with a chimney in the center and sleeping platforms along the walls, for 30 people. They dug for 2 days. He stood nearby and gave orders, not like a baron, like a foreman. To the left, deeper, stop, the clay is softer here, take it from here. Cho Byung-hoo worked silently and furiously. His men, former soldiers, worked like machines. They were used to following orders, and for the first time in a long while, these orders made sense. By the 14th night, the large dugout was ready. 30 people lay down on the warm bunks. Grandpa Kim lit his pipe. Among them, Suni's children crawled under a blanket sewn from rags. Quiet, warm, safe. Lee Hajun stood outside and felt the dots inside the dugout growing brighter, one by one. 18 crystals had fallen overnight, more than in all the previous days combined. On the morning of the 15th day, Cho Byung-hoo approached him. Silently, he placed his ration in front of him, a bowl of thin porridge. He said briefly, "Eat, sir. You have to think." Lee Hajun looked at him, at the bowl. He wanted to refuse. He didn't. He took it. Because Cho Byung-hoo wasn't giving him a handout. He was making a pledge, in his own language, a soldier's language. "I'm giving you food, which means I believe you'll manage it better than I can." It was more than just words. A seal clicked in his chest. 12 out of 111 subjects. 12 people had officially recognized him, voluntarily, not because he was a baron, because they had water, warmth, and a baron who ate from the same pot. Lee Hajun finished his porridge. He handed the bowl back. He told Cho Byung-hoo that they were starting to dig a trench today. Cho Byung-hoo raised an eyebrow. A trench? Why? Lee Hajun explained. They were on foreign land. The Dead Steppe was empty, but not deserted. Nomads roam it in winter. Beasts come out to the water. And when Songyeon finds out they're alive, they won't be sending congratulations. The moat is the first line of defense. Not a wall, a line. Then there will be a palisade, then a rampart, then a wall. But first, the moat. Cho Byung-hoo nodded. For the first time with respect, he understood that language. The language of defense. The language of a man who thinks 3 steps ahead. On the 16th day they began digging. 20 men in shifts. Lee Hajun marked out the perimeter. 400 paces. A square. A well inside. Dugouts inside. A smithy on the edge but still inside. Latrines beyond the moat on the leeward side. He explained this to Grandpa Kim and Cho Byung-hoo as if it were obvious. They listened but didn't understand why the outhouse had to be placed so far from the camp. He didn't bother explaining about cholera and typhus. He simply said it was the rule. Whoever broke it would have to clean the moat. On the 20th day, the moat was ready. 1.5 meters deep, 2 meters wide, muddy, crooked, but real. Beyond the moat, they began to erect a fence of dry branches. Taesung forged the staples that held the branches together, crooked but sturdy. Lee Hajun looked down at the camp from the hill, the ditch, the fence. 5 dugouts and 1 large one. A smithy with smoke rising, a well in the center. People, alive, working. For the first time in 20 days, he thought not of survival, but of the future. And at that moment, Grandfather Kim shouted from the eastern edge of the moat. Lee Hajun ran. A woman was standing at the edge of the ditch, young, dirty, with a bow on her back. A man lay next to her, unconscious, with a wound on his side that was bandaged with a dirty rag. The woman looked at the camp, at the ditch, at the fence, at the smoke rising from the dugouts. Then, at Lee Hajun. She asked one thing. Is it true that they feed people here? Lee Hajun nodded. He asked what had happened to the wounded man. She said he was her partner, that they had fled from a neighboring principality, that a punitive squad was chasing them, that she was an archer and could shoot, that all she needed was a place for the wounded man and a little water. Lee Hajun looked at her closely, composed, taciturn, hands stiff from the bowstring, eyes like those of a person who had long since stopped begging. He told them to carry the wounded man to the dugout. He said there would be enough. He said the punitive squad was a problem, but not today. The woman gave her name, So Rin, an archer, the daughter of a military family. Points 112 and 113 on his map lit up simultaneously. Dull, hungry, but alive. Blacksmith Park Taesyeon appeared and forged the first knife. A large dugout for 30 people was built. Cho Byung-hoo acknowledged Lee Hajun by giving him his ration. A moat was started around the camp. On the 20th day, the archer So Rin arrived with her wounded partner. So Rin didn't trust anyone. You could tell by the way she slept, back to the wall, bow within reach, 3 arrows stuck in the ground nearby so she could grab them without looking. Her partner turned out not to be a partner, a brother in arms from her father's unit, the only one who had survived alongside her. The wound on his side was deep, filthy. Lee Hajun washed it with boiled water. He applied a bandage made from clean cloth he'd torn from his own shirt. A baron in a silk shirt, tearing silk for bandages. Grandfather Kim stood nearby and watched. He said nothing, but Grandfather Kim's dot on the map grew even brighter. Soden watched as Lee Hajun bandaged the wounded man, silently. Then she asked why he washed his hands before touching the wound. He said that dirt kills faster than a sword. She nodded. She didn't believe him, but she remembered. On the 21st day, Lee Hajun went to the eastern edge of the camp and stood there for 2 hours. The seal was showing him something. In the southeast, 2 days' journey away, dots were moving. Not his people. Strangers. 12, maybe 15. Armed. It could be a punitive expedition after Soden, or nomads, or just vagabonds. He couldn't tell for sure. The seal could only sense his own subjects in detail. It showed strangers as blurry shadows at the edge of perception. But the shadows were moving toward them. He called for Cho Byung-hoo and Soden. He explained. Soden said it was most likely a punitive expedition. 10 horsemen, maybe 12. Light cavalry. They'll send them out on a reconnaissance mission. If they find them alive, they'll return with a report. Then they'll come in earnest. Cho Byung-hoo cursed. He asked how many weapons they had. 8 axes, Soden's bow with 17 arrows, Taeson's 4 knives, and 1 old sword belonging to Grandpa Kim, which he'd been hiding in rags at the bottom of the cart since day 1. Against 12 armored horsemen, that's nothing. Lee Hajun thought for 3 hours. He sat on the edge of the ditch and stared out at the steppe. Then he said they wouldn't fight. Cho Byung-hoo looked at him as if the Baron had gone mad again. Lee Hajun explained, the 12 horsemen are a punitive squad. They aren't looking for a battle. They're looking for fugitives. 1 woman and 1 wounded man. They don't know about the camp. They don't know about the well. They don't know there are 113 people here. They're following Soden's trail and expect to find the 2 fugitives in the steppe. If they see a camp surrounded by a moat, with smoke rising from the dugouts and armed guards on the rampart, their mission will change. They won't attack an unknown fortification. They'll turn back and report. That will buy us time. Not much. 2 months. Maybe 3. But time. So Rin listened in silence. Then she said that the Baron thinks like a military commander. Lee Hajun shook his head. He said he thinks like a logistics officer. A military commander seeks battle. A logistician looks for a way to avoid it. Cho Byung-hoo smiled. For the first time in the Baron's presence, he said it was the first intelligent thing he'd heard from the nobleman. For the next 2 days, the entire camp worked for show. Lee Hajun was in command. They deepened the moat by half a meter. They raised the palisade by a meter. At the corners, they erected 4 watchtowers made of bound poles. They stationed men with axes on the watchtowers. From a distance, you can't tell the difference between an axe and a spear. They let thicker smoke billow from the dugouts. Taesyeong forged 4 spearheads from the last piece of iron. The spears were made from long poles, crooked and fragile, but shiny. On the 3rd day, the shadows at the edge of perception drew closer. Lee Hajun stood on a watchtower and looked out over the steppe. Seorin stood beside him with a bow. The bowstring was taut. She asked quietly if he could see them. He said he could sense them. 12, on horseback. They'd stopped about 3 li to the southeast, standing, watching. So Rin asked how he knew. He didn't answer. They stood like that for an hour. Then the shadows began to move, not toward the camp, south, back the way they came. Lee Hajun exhaled. Sorin lowered her bow. She looked at him for a long time. She asked what kind of place this was. He said it was a camp. She shook her head. She said she'd seen many camps. A refugee camp in the neighboring principality. Her father's regiment's military camp. The slave camp at the mine they'd run past. This one was unlike any of them. It smelled of porridge, not fear. Lee Hajun said nothing. Sorin asked if she could stay. Not because of her wounded partner, not because of the punitive squad, just to stay. He nodded. He said she didn't need permission. It was her decision. So Rin nodded. She jumped down from the watchtower. She went to Grandpa Kim and asked him to show her the perimeter. Grandpa Kim led the way. Lee Hajun watched her go. Point 112 on his map grew brighter. Not from food, not from the heat, from the decision. A person who chooses to stay on their own burns brighter than one who has nowhere else to go. That evening, he held his first council. Not a council of a baron with his subjects, a council of people who share a common problem. 4 people came: Grandpa Kim, Cho Byung-hoo, Sorin, and Taesyeong, who was called because without his knives and staples, the camp would fall apart. Lee Hajun laid out pebbles on the ground. Here is the camp. Here is the moat. Here is the steppe. Here is the south, from where the punitive expedition came. Here is the north, where the steppe stretches into infinity. They have 2 months. In 2 months, they need to do 3 things. First, plow the field. The millet is running out. They need their own grain. The seal can sprout seeds overnight if there are enough crystals. But there aren't enough crystals. That means they need more people in good health. That means more dugouts, more warmth, more food from what's available. A vicious cycle that must be broken. Second, weapons. Taesyeong must stop making knives and start making arrowheads. Sorin will teach those who are capable to shoot. Not an army, a militia. 10 people who can hit a target 30 paces away. That will be enough so that the next raiding party doesn't just get away, but gets away with losses. Third, reconnaissance. Sorin is heading southeast tomorrow, alone, for 3 days. We need to know what's out there. Roads, water sources, other settlements. If they exist, they're potential allies or potential enemies, and we need to know in advance. Sorin nodded, not a second's hesitation. Cho Byung-hoo said the militia would take care of it. He'd find 10 men. Taesyeong said he needed more ore. Lee Hajun said he'd show them where to dig tomorrow. The seal had already revealed the spot, the west bank of the riverbed. The vein is 1.5 meters below the surface. Grandpa Kim remained silent throughout the meeting. Then, when everyone had left, he stayed behind. He looked at Lee Hajun. He said quietly that he had served under 6 commanders in his life. 2 were smart, 1 was brave, 3 were nothing special. None of them sat on the ground with the soldiers and laid out pebbles. Lee Hajun asked if that was good or bad. Grandpa Kim took a long drag on his pipe. He said he hadn't decided yet, but that his hands no longer trembled. And that meant more than words. Lee Hajun nodded. That night he lay awake counting the dots. 113. 30 of them bright, the rest dim but alive. 23 days until the first harvest, if the seal helps. 2 months until a possible attack. 90 days until winter, 20 below had already passed. 70 days, not much, but enough. In South Sudan, he had set up camp with 14 men. Here, he had 70. And the seal, and Sorin, and Cho Byung-hoo, and Taesyeong, and Grandpa Kim, whose hands didn't shake. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the field. The day after tomorrow, shooting practice. 1 task each day. He fell asleep, and 113 dots twinkled in the darkness behind his closed eyelids like stars in a new sky. A punitive squad of 12 horsemen approached the camp, but saw the fortifications and retreated. Sorin decided to stay voluntarily. The first war council was held, and tasks were assigned for the next 2 months. The camp is preparing for the first sowing and the formation of a militia. So Rin returned 3 days later, dirty, hungry, with scraped knees and information worth more than all the grain in the camp. She sat down by the fire and spoke briefly. 40 li to the southeast stands an outpost of the Principality of Hamyon. 20 soldiers, a wooden palisade. They control the only road by which supplies can be brought in from the south. 60 li to the east, 3 tribes of steppe dwellers roam. Small tribes, about 200 people in each, not warlike. They herd goats and sheep along seasonal routes. They fear the nomadic Khan Temur Khan, who collects tribute from them in the form of livestock and people every 6 months. The north is empty. The dead steppe stretches to the horizon. But so Rin found something. An old road, made of stone, buried in sand and dust, but stone nonetheless. It ran straight north and disappeared behind the hills. A road from a bygone era. Lee Hajun listened and took it all in. Hamyon's outpost is both a problem and an opportunity. If Hamyon learns that a settlement is growing in the dead steppe, he might send his men. Not to help, to lay claim to the territory. The nomadic tribes are potential allies if we stop plundering them, and the old road was a question to which he had no answer yet. But the seal flinched in his chest at the mention of the road, briefly, as if it had recognized something. He didn't dwell on it. Too many tasks for today. On the morning of the 24th, he led his men out into the field. 3 chins of land west of the camp. The dead steppe. Gray, cracked soil where nothing had grown for 200 years. Cho Byung-hoo looked at the ground and said the Baron had finally lost his mind. Not even a weed would grow here. Lee Hajun silently dropped to his knees. He took a handful of earth, crumbled it between his fingers. The earth was dead, but not empty. He could feel it. Not through the seal, through experience. In South Sudan, he had seen the earth after fires. Black, dead to the eye. But beneath the layer of ash, minerals remained. The structure remained. All it needed was water and time. Here, instead of time, he had crystals. He took 12 crystals out of his pocket. All he had collected over the last few days. 12 days of someone's labor. 12 moments when someone felt better. He formulated the task, not an abstract one, a concrete one. A field for 113 people, millet that would grow in 20 days instead of 60. The earth remembers how to be alive. Help it remember. The crystals scattered across his fingers, 12 warm flashes. The earth beneath his palms trembled, not strongly, as if something deep below had stirred in its sleep. The gray soil darkened. It turned brown, then almost black, damp. In an area 3 zena wide, the dead earth came to life. Cho Byung-hoo stood nearby and said nothing. His Adam's apple moved. Grandfather Kim knelt down next to Lee Hajun. He touched the earth, brought it to his nose, sniffed. Then he looked at the Baron. In his eyes there was something new. Not surprise, not fear. Hope. A terrible thing. Worse than fear, because hope can kill when it leaves. Lee Hajun took a handful of millet out of the sack, the last they could afford for planting. He showed the people how to plant it. Not too deep, a palm's width apart. Watered from the well. They worked all day. Everyone who could, even the children. Suni carried water in her bowl, in small portions, back and forth, back and forth. Lee Hajun watched her and saw how her dot on the map glowed steadily and brightly. A child doing a good deed glows brighter than an adult. He remembered that discovery. By evening, the field was sown. Lee Hajun spent 2 more crystals to ensure the seeds sprouted by morning. On the morning of the 25th day, green shoots were poking out of the ground. 113 people stood at the edge of the field and watched. Silence. Then one of the women began to cry. Then another. Then a man. A bearded adult debtor in his 40s, who for 20 days had shown nothing but anger, sat down on the ground and wept as he looked at the green sprouts in the dead steppe. 26 crystals fell in an hour, a record, because hope gives more than food, more than warmth, more than anything else. When a person sees that tomorrow will be better than yesterday, the seal bursts with crystals. Lee Hajun stood at the edge of the field and sensed the exponential growth. It was beginning. On the 26th day, the first strangers arrived. 3 of them, a man, a woman, a boy of about 12, ragged, hungry, from the south, from a village near the Hamyan outpost. The man said he'd heard from a passing merchant that in the Dead Steppe there was a baron who fed people. He didn't believe it. He went to check. He saw smoke. He saw a moat. He saw a green field in the Dead Steppe. He believed it. He asked if they could stay. Lee Hajun said they could. He asked what the man could do. The man said he was a carpenter. Lee Hajun closed his eyes for a second. The seal revealed it. The man's dot flickered like Tayson's, quickly and erratically. Talent, waiting for its place. He told the carpenter that tomorrow he would show him where the tree grows. The man didn't understand. A tree in the Dead Steppe. Lee Hajun smiled. He said it isn't growing yet, but tomorrow it will grow. And he wasn't joking. The seal had already produced a blueprint. A grove of fast-growing trees according to the seal's blueprint. The spirit tree. It grows from a crystal to the height of an adult in 3 days. The wood is soft but strong, perfect for construction. It takes 20 crystals. He had 38. 20 for the grove, 18 in reserve. On the 27th day he planted the first grove. 20 crystals went into the ground. 3 days later, trees stood on the western side of the camp. 30 trunks, not tall, 4 meters, but alive, green, in the Dead Steppe. A carpenter named Moon stood among them, touching the bark. His hands were trembling, not from the cold, from happiness. Point 116 on Lee Hajun's map flashed so brightly that he squinted. The master stood next to the tree that awaited his hands. The seal paid more for this than for anything else. By the 30th day, the camp was unrecognizable. The moat had been deepened to 2 meters. The wattle fence had been replaced with a palisade made of spirit wood. 8 dugouts. The smithy was in operation every day. Taeseong was forging arrowheads and brackets for construction. The carpenter, Moon, was building for the new houses. Real ones, not dugouts, houses. The first field is sprouting. The second has been sown. 116 people, 40 of them loyal. 40 points that have been burning steadily and brightly for 30 days straight. Through them, Lee Hajun senses the others more deeply, not just hunger and cold, mood, anxiety, joy. The network is to work. He stands on the watchtower and looks out over his camp, a camp that a month ago was a bunch of dying people in carts, smoke from the chimneys, the clang of a hammer from the smithy, children's laughter by the well. Soden is on the palisade with a bow. Cho Byung-hoo is herding the militia on the platform beyond the moat. Suni runs through the camp with a bowl full of porridge, shouting that Grandpa Kim needs to eat. Lee Hajun closes his eyes. 116 dots, smooth and warm. 1 month. 1 month. In 2 months like this, he'll build a wall. In 3, they'll have a city. In 6, they'll come here by the hundreds. He opens his eyes and climbs down from the watchtower. Tomorrow, they'll start building the first real house, made of wood, with a window, with a door, for the widow Park, whose left hand doesn't work, because an empire doesn't begin with a throne room. It begins with a door that can be opened with one hand. So-rin returned from reconnaissance and told him about the Hamyon outpost and the nomadic tribes. Lee Hajun brought the field to life with crystals and grew a grove of spirit trees. The first foreign refugees arrived. By the 30th day, the camp had become a fortified settlement with 116 people and 40 loyalists. On the 35th day, Lee Hajun felt for the first time how the seal was transcending his understanding. He stood at the northern edge of the camp and looked at the old stone road that So-rin had found. The road stretched northward, straight as an arrow. The stones were smooth, hewn with a precision impossible to achieve with hand tools. Not a single blade of grass had sprouted between them in 200 years. He dropped to his knees and placed his palm on a stone. The seal in his chest trembled, strongly. It didn't hurt, but it was distinct, as if something beneath the ground had responded to his touch. For a second, an image flashed before his eyes. Not a blueprint, not a map. A city, huge, white walls, towers reaching into the clouds, thousands of points twinkling like stars. And then darkness, instant, as if someone had blown out all the candles at once. Lee Hajun pulled his hand away. His heart was pounding. The seal cooled for a second and then grew hot again. He didn't understand what it was, but he remembered. The road leads somewhere, and that somewhere knows about him. He stood up and returned to camp. No time to think about the mysteries of the past, too many tasks in the present. On the 36th day, the second wave of refugees arrived. 17 people, 6 of them were children. Peasants from the village near the Hamyan outpost. Their village head had sold half the harvest to the Hamyan governor for protection that never came. When nomads stole their goats, the village head just threw up his hands. The peasants gathered what they could and headed north, to the baron who feeds them. The rumor spread, slowly, but it spread. Lee Hajun took them in. He settled them in dugouts. He put them to work not on the first day, on the third. For the first 2 days, the newcomers ate and slept. That was the rule. A hungry man is no worker. A hungry man is a ticking time bomb. Feed him, let him sleep. On the third day, he'll come on his own and ask how he can help. Lee Hajun had learned this in Bangladesh. Among the newcomers was a woman, about 35 years old, her hands in the soil, her back bent from constantly stooping over the garden bed, a gardener. Her name was Odanbi. She looked at Lee Hajun's field and said the millet was planted too densely. It would suffocate. It needed thinning. Lee Hajun looked at her, then at the field, then at her again. She was right. The seal's blueprint provided the optimal layout for seeds and crystals, but the seal didn't know that this particular soil, after 200 years of slumber, was richer than usual, and that the millet grew more vigorously in it. Danbi knew this. She had been digging in the earth with her hands for 30 years and understood the soil better than any blueprint. He told her she was right, and that from this day forward, she was in charge of all the fields. Danbi opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, asked, "All the fields?" He nodded. "All of them." She paused. Then she said she needed people, 5 women who knew the land. He said, "Take them." She turned and walked toward the field. An hour later, her voice carried from there, commanding, confident, the voice of a person who was finally doing what she did best. Day 52, population 153, 35 crystals a day, consistently, 60 loyalists. Lee Hajun began to feel the limits of his body. Not the seal. The seal was working. The body couldn't keep up. He hadn't slept properly since day 1, 4 hours at most. The rest of the time was spent on patrols, construction, council meetings, planning, a map of checkpoints to verify every evening. His head ached constantly, a dull pain behind his eyes. He ignored it, a habit from his past life. In Kutupalong, he once went 4 days without sleep when the dam burst. He held out, but back then he was 34, and the body was his own. This body is younger, but weaker, softer, unaccustomed to the strain. So Rin was the first to notice. She noticed everything, in fact. She approached him in the evening by the campfire. She said he walked like a man whose ground was slipping from under his feet. She asked when he had last slept for more than 4 hours. He couldn't remember. She stood up silently. She left. She returned 10 minutes later with a blanket. She threw it onto his lap. She said she'd be on the wall for the next 4 hours. Cho Byung-hoo was on patrol. Grandpa Kim was at the well. The world wouldn't end. Sleep. It was an order, not a request. Lee Hajun looked up at her. She stood over him with her bow on her back, giving him that look that brooked no argument. He lay down. He fell asleep in a minute. He slept for 6 hours. Sodin didn't let anyone in to see him, not even Grandpa Kim, who came to ask about the morning patrol. She told him that the Baron was sleeping, and that if Grandpa Kim couldn't resolve the issue himself, he should wait. Grandpa Kim left grumbling. But Sodin's mark on Lee Hajun's map that night became one of the brightest. Not because of prosperity, but because, for the first time in a long while, she was concerned not with survival, but with a person. The 60th day, the first harvest. The millet ripened in 20 days instead of 60. The crystals in the living earth had done their work. Odanbi commanded the harvest like a general. Women with sickles walked across the field in even rows. Children gathered ears of grain. The elderly tied sheaves. Lee Hajun stood at the edge of the field and counted. A harvest for 4 months. If they rationed, enough for 5. If they planted the second field, which had already been plowed, there would be a supply for half a year by winter. For the first time since day 1, he thought of a word he had never allowed himself to say before. Enough. Enough food, enough water, enough shelter. The people are alive. All 153 of them, not a single loss since the first old man in the cart. On the evening of the 60th day, he called a council, no longer 4, 7, Grandfather Kim, Cho Byung-hoo, So Rin, Tae-seong, Carpenter Moon, Oh Dan-bi, and a new man, a young man from the latest wave of refugees named Kang Jae-woo, a former clerk in the office of the Hamgyong governor. He fled because he refused to sign a false inventory, literate, precise. He knows how the princely bureaucracy works from the inside. Lee Hajun put him in charge of counting the supplies, everything, grain, firewood, iron, crystals, water in the well, people, a daily report, written in charcoal on the wall, so everyone could see. Transparency. When people see numbers, they stop being afraid, because fear thrives on ignorance. Kang Jae-woo began counting, and on the very first day, he found a problem. Iron. There was almost none left. The bog ore yielded little. Tae-seong was working at his limit. Every tip, every bracket, every knife is a choice. A knife or a tip, a bracket or a door hinge. There wasn't enough iron for everything. Lee Ha-jun fell into thought. Then he looked north, at the old stone road, and said that tomorrow he would walk along it, alone, for one day, to see what was there. Cho Byung-hoo said it was foolish. Sorin said she would go with him. He said no. The camp needed Sorin more than he did. Sorin clenched her jaw. She said nothing. On the morning of the 61st day, Lee Ha-jun left the camp through the north gate and walked along the old stone road, alone, with a flask of water and a piece of flatbread. The seal on his chest was warm, 153 dots on his back. The Dead Steppe lay ahead, and the road that led to where a city had stood 200 years ago. Lee Ha-jun touched the ancient road and saw an instant vision of the lost city. Refugees continued to arrive. Gardener Oh Dan-bi took charge of the farm. The first millet harvest had been gathered. Lee Ha-jun set off alone along the ancient road to the north. The road led straight ahead. The stones beneath his feet were warm, not from the sun. The sun in the Dead Steppe gave off little warmth. The stones were warm in themselves. The seal sensed them, every slab, as if the road were part of the same system. Lee Ha-jun walked for 3 hours. The steppe around him was empty. Gray earth, gray sky, not a sound except for the wind. Then the road began to descend, gently, barely noticeably. He wouldn't have felt it if he hadn't been counting his steps. After 1,000 steps, the descent grew steeper. The road led into a crevice between 2 stone ridges. The ridges were too smooth, too symmetrical, not natural. Walls, destroyed to the ground but still recognizable. He walked between them and felt the mark. It pulsed, faster, more often, as if it were recognizing the place. The crevice widened. A valley opened up. Small, about 1.5 miles across, stone ridges on all sides. The wind barely reached this place, and in the center of the valley stood a building, not a ruin, a building, stone, low, windowless, with a single door. The door was open. Lee Ha-jun stopped at the edge of the valley and stared for 10 minutes without moving. The seal was so hot that he could feel the heat through his shirt. The inscription flickered before his eyes. Supply node detected. Arrow 1. Status, dormant. Access granted. Authority level, suzerain. He approached the building. He entered. It was dark inside. Then it wasn't dark. The walls glowed with a dim blue light, the same color as the crystals. The room was small, 10 steps by 10, a stone pedestal in the center. The pedestal was empty, but next to the pedestal, there were niches in the walls. 12 niches, 11 were empty. In the 12th lay ingots, metal, dark, heavy. He picked one up, iron, pure, unadulterated, better than anything Tae-seong had smelted from the swamp ore. There were 30 ingots in the niche, each the size of a palm. 30 ingots of pure iron. For a camp of 153 people, this is a treasure. He examined the remaining niches, empty, plundered, cleared out. 200 years ago, or 800 years ago, someone took everything except this last niche. Maybe they didn't find it. Maybe they didn't need it. Maybe they left it there on purpose. Lee Ha-jun didn't know. He examined the pedestal. There was a recess on its surface, round, exactly the size of a crystal. He took a single crystal out of his pocket. He looked at the recess. He placed it there. The crystal lit up. The pedestal hummed, low, deep, and bassy. The walls glowed brighter, and a map unfolded before his eyes. Not his small map of the camp, a map of everything. The entire continent of Ryogyeong, from the southern coast to the northern edge of the Dead Steppe. 12 principalities glowed as dim dots, 12 seals, all barely alive. flickering like embers in a dying fire. And his seal, bright, pulsing, the only one that was growing. He saw the scale, for the first time. His camp on this map was a tiny spark in an ocean of darkness. But it was burning. And the dead steppe around him wasn't just dead. On the map, it looked like a fabric with holes. Once, this entire land had glowed. Once, streams of energy had flowed across it from one seal to another. A network, a unified system. And it had died. Instantly. The map showed him how. The streams had stopped, radiating outward from the center, like a heart that had stopped beating. The center was in the north, where the road disappeared over the horizon. The core. The map went dark. The crystal shattered. Lee Hajun stood in the darkness and breathed. Then the walls lit up again with a dim, steady glow. He sat down on the floor by the pedestal. He thought. 12 seals. 12 principalities. Each prince carries a fragment of a single system and does not understand what it is. They think the seal is a symbol of power, a beautiful trinket from their ancestors. But it is the nervous system of a dead organism. And he, one of the 12, is trying to revive his fragment. He is the only one who succeeds, because he is the only one who feeds the seal correctly, not with loyalty, with prosperity. He gathered the ingots into a sack. It was heavy, 30 iron ingots, 10 kilograms. For his current body with its soft hands, that was a lot. But he carried it. The return trip took 4 hours. By evening, he entered the camp through the northern gate. Rin was standing at the gate. She was waiting. She didn't ask where he'd been. She looked at the sack, at his face, at his eyes in which something had changed. She said only one thing. "You found it." He nodded. He didn't tell her everything. Not because he didn't trust her, because he didn't know how to explain what he'd seen. The city on the map, a dead network, the core in the north. It was too much. For now, he'd only said he'd found iron, 30 ingots. When Taesong saw the ingots, he sat down on the ground and stroked them as if they were alive. Pure iron, no slag, no impurities. From a single ingot like that, he could make 20 arrowheads, or 10 knives, or 5 axes. 30 ingots is an arsenal. Lee Hajun gave him 25. He kept 5. For a situation he couldn't put into words, but sensed. At night, he lay there and thought about the map, about the core in the north, about the 12 dead seals, about the fact that he was doing something far greater than just setting up camp, something he didn't fully understand, something he would only begin to understand when he was ready. The seal lay against his chest, warm to the touch. 153 points flickered evenly, each in its place, each one alive. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to think of home, of Seoul, of the wet asphalt of Olympic Highway, of the latest report he hadn't had time to send, about his morning coffee, about how the alarm clock rang at 6 in the morning and he hated it every single day. Strange, he didn't miss home. Maybe because he was needed more here. Maybe because he had Grandpa Kim here, and Suni with her bowl, and Sodin with her bow, and 153 reasons to get up tomorrow morning and carry on. Lee Hajun found an ancient supply depot along the old road with 30 ingots of pure iron. A pedestal in the building showed him a map of the entire continent with 12 extinguished seals and a dead network. He learned that all the seals were part of a single system, and that the core was located in the north. The 70th day. A population. The group numbered 230 people. Refugees arrived every week, 5 at a time, 10 at a time. Once, 22 came at once, an entire village. They had been burned by Temirkan's nomads. They had walked for 14 days across the Dead Steppe. They lost 3, 2 old people and a child. When they saw the camp walls and the green fields beyond them, the elderly woman fell to her knees and began banging her forehead against the ground. Lee Hajun lifted her up. He told her not to bow. He said, "They don't bow here. Here they work." She looked at him with tear-filled eyes and said she would work for the rest of her life. He said a lifetime wasn't necessary. Tomorrow would be enough. The camp was bursting at the seams. 230 people. That's no longer a camp. It's a village. Lee Hajun drew up a plan every night. Not on paper. There was no paper. On the packed earth with a stick. A new quarter to the west. An extension of the stockade. A second well. A third field. A workshop for weavers, because among the refugees were 3 women who knew how to spin wool, and wool meant clothing, and clothing meant a winter that could be survived without rags. The 75th day, what Lee Hajun had feared from day 1 happened. A revolt. Not a big one, not bloody, quiet. 5 men from the group of debtors who had arrived in the very first wagon refused to work. Their leader, a man named Hwang Seok, said they weren't the Baron's slaves, that they dug from morning till night, that they work like animals, that the crystals are witchcraft, and that the Baron devours their souls through the seal. He said this loudly, in the square by the well, in front of everyone. Lee Hajun stood and listened. He didn't interrupt. Cho Byung-hoo stood nearby, clenching his fists. So-rin, perched on the wall, placed her hand on her quiver. Grandfather Kim smoked his pipe with a stony face. Hwang Seok finished speaking. Lee Hajun was silent for a moment. Then he said 3 things. First, no one here is a slave. Hwang Seok and his men can leave right now. The gates are open. He'll give them 3 days' worth of food and a flask of water. Second, crystals aren't souls. They're work, compressed into stone. Each crystal appears when a person gets better, not when they get worse. It's easy to check. If Hwang Seok leaves, not a single crystal will be lost among those who remain. If Lee Hajun were eating souls, the system would falter when a person left. Third, the work is really hard, and it's his fault. He didn't set standards. There's no schedule, no days off. That's a mistake. His mistake, not theirs. Starting tomorrow, work is 6 days a week. The 7th is a day off. 4 hours of work in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. The rest of the time is their own. Whoever wants to work more, let them work. Whoever doesn't want to, won't be forced. Silence. Hwang Seok stood there, not knowing what to do. He expected the Baron to get angry, to order a flogging, to throw him into a pit. He knew how barons reacted to disobedience. He didn't know how to react to a baron who says he is to blame. One of the 5 men behind Hwang Seok stepped aside, then a second, then a third. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to be heard, and they were heard. Hwang Seok was left alone. He stood there. He spat. He said he'd look into it. He turned around and went back to his quarters. Cho Byung-hoo approached Lee Hajun afterward. He said quietly that it was a mistake, that Hwang Seok should have been punished as an example, that now everyone would think they could yell at the Baron and nothing would happen. Lee Hajun shook his head. He said that if someone yelled at the Baron and the Baron was wrong, then the Baron should listen. And if the Baron was right, then people would sort it out themselves. Just like now. 4 out of 5 had returned. That was the answer. Cho Byung-hoo snorted. He didn't agree, but he didn't argue. He was learning to trust the Baron slowly, like learning to trust a bridge, stepping carefully, checking every plank. The 80th day, the first night of winter, the temperature dropped so sharply that the water in the buckets was covered with ice by dawn. Lee Hajun hadn't slept. He could feel the dots on the map shivering one by one from the cold. 230 people. The dugouts were warm. The houses that Moon had built were warm, but not everyone had moved in yet. 20 people from the last wave were living in tents. The tents wouldn't last through the winter. He stepped out into the darkness. 3 o'clock in the morning. The cold was so biting that his beard was covered in frost within a minute. He went to the tents. He roused the people. He led them to the large dugout. Everyone who had remained in the tents was brought there as well. They packed the dugout like a barrel. 40 people in a space meant for 30. Crowded, but warm. Then he did something he hadn't done since the 5th day. He used the crystals to start a fire. 50 crystals. All they had in reserve. 5 fires throughout the camp burned until dawn, without firewood and without smoke. People sat around them in silence. Suni huddled close to Grandpa Kim. Taeseong warmed his hands over the fire and thought about tomorrow's forging. Dambi calculated in her head how much grain they would need for the winter. Sorin stood on the wall and gazed out at the steppe. The Dead Steppe at night in winter was the most terrifying place on the continent. The wind carried icy sand. The temperature dropped below the point at which a person freezes to death within an hour. She stood there and didn't leave. Lee Hajun climbed up to her. He brought a cloak. Silently, he draped it over her shoulders. She didn't turn around. She said she could see lights to the south, far away. He looked. He saw nothing. His eyes weren't like hers, but the seal confirmed it. Shadows at the edge of perception. Many, far away, but moving, not toward them. Along the edge of the steppe, nomads. Temur Khan was leading his people to winter pastures. It's not dangerous yet, but he'll return in the spring, and by spring, he'll find out that a city has sprung up on his steppe. Sodin said quietly that by spring they'd need a real wall, not a palisade. Stone. Lee Hajun nodded, said he knew, said there was stone. The old road. Slabs. Take apart part of the road and build a wall out of it. Sodin turned to him, looked at him, smiled for the first time. Not widely, just the corner of her mouth. She said the Baron thinks differently, not like barons. He said he wasn't a baron. She asked who he was. He remained silent. They stood side by side on the wall, a cloak on her shoulders, the wind in the steppe. 5 campfires below, 230 warm, living points behind them. The 90th day, everyone alive, all 230. Lee Hajun stood on the watchtower and looked down at his settlement. 16 dugouts, 4 houses, a smithy, a workshop, 3 fields, 2 wells, a stone wall running a quarter of the way around the perimeter, a granary with enough grain for 4 months, a storehouse with iron. Children ran between the houses and laughed. Women spun wool at the entrance to the workshop. Men hauled stones for the wall. Grandpa Kim sat by the well and smoked his pipe. Suni brought him porridge, every day, like a ritual. Lee Hajun closed his eyes. The first winter, 90 days. Not a single casualty since that first old man in the cart. He clenched his fist, unclenched it, opened his eyes. Good. The first stage is complete. Now the real work begins. Refugees continued to arrive, and the population grew to 230. Lee Hajun quelled Huang Sok's quiet rebellion by acknowledging his own mistakes and establishing a work schedule. The first winter night required emergency measures. By the 90th day, all 230 people are alive, and the settlement is ready for winter. Winter in the Dead Steppe lasted 120 days. Lee Hajun counted every one, not because he was afraid, because every day of winter was a cost. Grain, firewood from the spirit trees that grew more slowly in the cold, crystals for heating, water from wells that froze over in the mornings and had to be broken open with a crowbar. Every morning he woke up, and the first thing he did was check the map. 230 dots. Are they all lit? Are they all alive? On the 15th day of winter, a child fell ill. A 4-year-old boy from the last wave of refugees. A fever, a cough, a dot on the map was flashing. Lee Hajun woke up at 3 in the morning because he felt that flashing. Like a stab in the temple, he got up. He walked across the camp to the dugout where the boy's family lived. The mother was sitting over him, not knowing what to do. Lee Hajun felt the child's forehead. Hot, dry. His breathing was wheezy. In his past life, he would have said pneumonia. Here, that word didn't exist. Here, children with such symptoms simply died. He spent 3 crystals. He formulated the task. A 4-year-old boy, fever, cough, lungs. What is needed? The seal issued a prescription, a decoction of 3 herbs. One grew by the well, the second in the crevices on the northern slope. The third could be replaced with the bark of the spirit tree. Brew with boiling water. Administer every 2 hours. He roused Grandpa Kim. The old man didn't complain. He got up and went to gather the herbs in the dark. By dawn, the decoction was ready. By evening, the boy was feeling better. 3 days later, he was playing with the other children. His mother came to Lee Hajun and bowed silently. He told her again not to bow. She bowed once more and left. The boy's dot on the map was glowing steadily. Lee Hajun realized he needed a doctor. Not him, with his seal drawings. A real doctor. A man who knows the body and diseases and herbs. Without such a person, the coming winter would kill someone. On the 30th day of winter, he sent Sodin south with a mission, not reconnaissance, trade, 10 ingots of iron wrapped in cloth, and one word that had to be dropped at every inn. The Baron in the north is looking for a doctor, pays in iron, provides food, doesn't hurt anyone. Sodin left and returned 20 days later, alone, without a doctor, but with news. People were talking about them. At every inn from the Hamyon outpost to the Songyon border, people whispered about the Baron in the Dead Steppe, who feeds them, who doesn't beat people, whose fields turn green in winter. The last part was an exaggeration. The fields didn't turn green in winter, but rumors spread faster than millet. And one more piece of news. At the Songyon court, they remembered him. The governor of the Hamyon outpost sent a report to the capital. The exiled Baron is alive. He is building. People are flocking to him. Sodin said the report was sent a month ago. A reply from the capital will arrive by spring. Lee Hajun nodded. By spring, that means he has the winter to prepare. The 40th day of winter. Half the perimeter of the wall was complete. The stone from the old road turned out to be perfect, warm, solid. The slabs fit together almost without mortar. Moon built the wall like a man possessed, in the morning before dawn and in the evening after sunset, by the light of the campfires. His hands were cut to the bone by the stone. Lee Hajun told him to rest. Moon said he couldn't. He said that for the first time in his life, he was building something that would last. All the houses he had built in his past life belonged to strangers. This house belonged to him. Lee Hajun didn't argue. He simply brought him hot tea and a flatbread to the wall. Moon ate without stopping his work. The 50th day of winter, a caravan, 3 wagons from the south. Lee Hajun stood on the wall and watched them approach. The seal indicated 11 people, not soldiers, merchants, or maybe not exactly merchants. So-rin stood nearby with a drawn bow. Cho Byung-hoo had lined up the militia at the gate, 30 men with spears and axes, crooked, but standing straight. 3 months of training had turned them not into soldiers, but into men who wouldn't run at the sight of strangers. The caravan stopped at the gate. A woman stepped out of the first wagon, short, thin, with a sack on her shoulder and tired eyes. She asked if the Baron, who was looking for a doctor, was here. Lee Hajun climbed down from the wall. He approached her. He asked who she was. She gave her name, Han Mei, a wandering healer, an herbalist, exiled from her clan for heresy. Her heresy was that she washed her hands before touching a wound. Lee Hajun froze. He looked at her hands, clean, nails trimmed short, skin red from frequent washing. He recognized those hands, not these specific ones, the type, the hands of a person who understands hygiene in a world where that word hasn't been invented yet. He asked who had taught her. She said a southern sage, a wandering scholar from across the sea. He said that disease lives in filth, not in evil spirits. He was banished from 3 cities for those words. She was the only one who listened. Lee Hajun nodded. He said the sage was right. Han Mei blinked. In 20 years of wandering, not a single person had spoken those words to her. Not a single one. She opened her mouth to say something. She didn't say it. She pressed her lips together. She nodded. He led her through the camp. He showed her the well. He showed her the dugouts. He showed her the outhouses beyond the ditch on the leeward side. She stopped. She looked at the distance between the outhouse and the well. She looked at Lee Hajun. She asked quietly who had arranged it that way. He said it was him. She asked why. He said because dirty water kills faster than a sword. Her words from that conversation that never happened. Han Mei stood and looked at him for a long time. Then she said she was staying. She didn't ask about pay. She didn't ask about conditions. She just said she was staying. He showed her a dugout, the best one available. He said he would build her a hospital by spring, based on her blueprints. Whatever she said, that's how it would be. Han Mei looked at him again, with that long, attentive gaze that people who have seen too much have. Then she went to her room. So-rin approached Lee Hajun afterward. She said the doctor was looking at him strangely. Lee Hajun asked how strangely. So-rin thought for a moment. She said like a puzzle you've been trying to solve for a long time. He didn't answer. 10 more people arrived with Han Mei's caravan. The sick, the elderly, those she'd picked up along the way and couldn't bring herself to leave behind. 10 mouths to feed, 10 dots on the map, 240. There was enough grain left for 2.5 months, just enough to last until spring. Lee Hajun sat by the fire that evening and did the math. Kang Jae-woo sat down next to him with his report. Grain, iron, wood, crystals, people. Everything was written in charcoal on a small board. Precise, clear. The numbers didn't lie. Winter would squeeze them down to the last grain, but it would squeeze them with a 10-day reserve. 10 days between them and starvation. That would be enough, if nothing happens. Kang Jae-woo asked quietly what would happen in the spring. Lee Hajun looked at him. He said that everything would change in the spring. He didn't explain how, because he didn't know himself, but he could feel it. The pressure was mounting, stronger every day. 240 subjects, 80 loyal ones, 50 crystals a day. The exponential growth was gaining momentum. Winter would end, spring would come, and with it would come people, by the hundreds, by the thousands, to the Baron who feeds them. And then the real building would begin, not camps, cities. He lay down by the fire. Kanmei sat at the entrance to her dugout, sorting through herbs. So Rin stood on the wall. Grandpa Kim snored in the large dugout. Suni slept with a bowl pressed to her chest. A full one. 240 points burned evenly. Winter was in full swing, but spring was already in the air somewhere beyond the horizon. He didn't sense it through the mark. He just knew. Just as he knew that water in the Dead Steppe hides beneath a rock. Just as he knew that millet would grow. Just as he knew that people would come. Not because he believed, because he did everything to make it happen. Every day, one task. Finish building the wall tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, the hospital. Every day. In winter, Lee Hajun saved a sick child with a herbal decoction based on the seal's recipe. He sent So-rin south for a doctor and learned that they had remembered him at Song-yeon's court. The traveling doctor Han Mei arrived and was amazed that the Baron understood hygiene. The population had grown to 240 people. Spring arrived on the 121st day of winter. Lee Hajun stood on the wall and watched as the gray earth beyond the perimeter darkened with moisture. The first rain. Real rain. Not icy pellets, but warm rain. It fell on the Dead Steppe, and the steppes soaked it up greedily, like a man drinking after 3 days without water. By noon, grass began to sprout from the ground around the camp. Not the yellow, dead grass that had grown here before them. Green. Real. Within a radius of 500 paces from the walls, Lee Hajun watched and understood. This isn't rain. It was the seal. 240 people who had spent the winter in warmth and plenty. 80 loyal ones who had given up crystals every day. The crystals went into the ground through the wells, through the foundations of the houses, through the roots of the spirit trees. The earth around the camp was waking up, slowly, like a person after a long illness, but it was waking up. Han Mei stood next to him on the wall. She looked silently at the grass. Then she said that the earth here wasn't dead. It was sleeping. Lee Hajun nodded. He said he knew. She looked at him with that gaze So-rin had called strange. She said he knew too much for a baron from a run-down family. He didn't answer. She didn't press the matter. A silence settled between them that needed no words. Two people who had seen enough not to ask unnecessary questions. Spring brought people. So-rin was right. Word of mouth worked better than any herald. 400 people arrived in the first month of spring, another 600 in the second. By mid-spring, the population had surpassed 1,200. The camp became a city, not in appearance, in function. Lee Hajun slept no more than 4 hours a day, and So-rin once again threw a blanket over his knees every evening. He was building, every day. The wall closed in on the entire perimeter. Stone, made of slabs from the old road, 3 meters high, 4 watchtowers at the corners. Inside the walls were neighborhoods, the northern one for workshops, the southern one for housing, the western one for warehouses, the eastern one for the hospital, which Han Mei got exactly the way she wanted it. 4 rooms, a separate well, a stove for boiling water, and a sign above the entrance carved by Tae Seong. Wash your hands before entering. Anyone who doesn't wash their hands will be killed personally by Han Mei. Lee Hajun bowed to Han Mei at the waist in front of everyone in the square. He named her the city's sanitation officer. He gave her the right to expel anyone who entered the hospital with dirty hands. Han Mei stood before 1,000 people, calm, upright, her hands red from constant washing. Then she turned and walked around the corner of the hospital. So-rin followed her. She found her by the wall. Han Mei was crying, quietly, with her face covered by her hands. So-rin didn't ask. She just stood beside her. A minute later, Han Mei wiped her face. She said it was over. She returned to the hospital. No one saw her cry again. She arrived in the 6th month. Yun Ka. So-rin's scouts had brought her in. Found in the steppe, 2 days' journey to the east. Unconscious. 3 arrows in her back. Broken ribs, ears, tail. Gray fur caked with blood. A beast girl from the Grey Wolf clan, the last one. Han Mei worked on her for 12 hours, pulled out the arrows, cleaned the wounds, stitched them up. Lee Hajun stood nearby and sensed Yunka's dot on the map, dim, flickering, ready to go out. He had spent a large crystal for the first time on a single person. He formulated the treatment. Yunka, broken ribs, internal bleeding. Stop it. Heal it. The crystal crumbled. Yunka sighed, deeply, for the first time in 12 hours. Han Mei felt her ribs. She looked at Lee Hajun. She said nothing, but something flashed in her eyes that he had already seen. Understanding. She knew this wasn't just magic. She knew he knew what he was doing, and she knew that no one in this world should know what he knew. Yunka came to her senses a day later. The first thing she saw was the hospital ceiling. The second was a bowl of hot broth on a stool next to the bed. The third was Lee Hajun, sitting by the wall and waiting. He didn't know why he was waiting. A dot on the map was calling him. It didn't blink. It didn't fade. It pulled at him, as if this girl didn't need broth, but a presence, a living person nearby. Yunka looked at him, yellow eyes, vertical pupils, wolf-like. She growled, quietly, instinctively. A stranger. Danger. He didn't move. He said calmly that the broth would get cold, that she needed to eat, that she could growl as much as she wanted afterward. She stopped growling, reached for the bowl. Her hands were shaking. He didn't help, didn't touch her, just sat there. She ate slowly. Then she set the bowl down, looked at him, asked where she was. He said in the city of Seebok. She asked what Seebok was. He said it was dawn. She asked why dawn. He said because every morning the sun rises here, and people go to work, and children laugh, and it smells like porridge. And as long as that's the case, the city will be called Dawn. Yunka was silent for a long time. Then she closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek. Just one. She didn't wipe it away. The dot on the map went from dim to warm, not bright yet, but warm. According to the custom of the Grey Wolf clan, the man who brought food to a weak woman and stayed by her side while she ate became her chosen one. Lee Hajun didn't know this. He would find out in 6 months, and he wouldn't know how to react. But that was later. Spring brought rain, and the land around the camp began to come alive. The population grew to 1,200. Han Mei received a hospital, and Lee Hajun publicly acknowledged her merits. Scouts found the wounded beast girl Yunka, whom they healed with a crystal. The 9th month. The population was 4,500. Sebyok was no longer a village. It had become a town. 4 districts, a market, a blacksmith's row where Taesong now supervised 3 apprentices, a weaving workshop, a pottery workshop, a school. Yes, a school. Soji Min appeared in the 7th month. She was brought in a merchant's caravan as a gift to the new baron. A line in the inventory read, "A literate girl who sings." Lee Hajun read the inventory. Silently, he tore up the paper declaring her a slave. The merchant opened his mouth. Lee Hajun looked at him. The merchant closed his mouth. Then Lee Hajun turned to Soji Min. She stood before him, small, thin, with her head bowed, a slave's habit, not to look into the eyes. He asked what she wanted to do. She raised her head. For the first time in a long time, someone had asked her. She said one word, "Remember." He gave her a blank tablet and a piece of charcoal. He said that from this day forward, she was the city's keeper of memory. Every event, every name, every decision, she records. Without her signature, no decree is considered recorded. Soji Min took the tablet. Her hands were shaking, but when she wrote the first line, her hands stopped shaking. The archive began with a single sentence. Year 1, Month 7, the city of Seebok, population 3,100, keeper Soji Min. She became Lee Hajun's shadow. She followed him. She listened. She recorded. Everything. Silently. With a memory that was frightening. She remembered every conversation from the past 10 years, word for word. Every name. Every inflection. Lee Hajun looked at her and thought of the slave registry he had torn up, of the 7-year-old girl who had been sold, of a world where literacy is considered a commodity rather than a right. He set up a room for her in the archives building, the first room of her own in her life, with a door she could lock from the inside. On her first evening, Soji Min sat on the floor of her room and touched the door. She opened it. She closed it. She opened it. She closed it. For an hour. Hanmei brought her tea and a blanket. She said nothing. She just left it there and walked away. The women of this city understood each other without words. In the 10th month, Amber Caldwell's son arrived, petite, red-haired, wearing wrought crystal glasses, with a bag stuffed with tools and scrolls. Her workshop in Songyeon had been burned down for activities unbecoming of a woman. It took her 40 days to reach Seebach, alone, through 2 principalities and the Dead Steppe. At the gates, Sorin asked who she was and why she was there. Amber said she was a cartographer, that she knew how to survey the land, that she had heard of the city in the steppe and wanted to map it. Sorin took her to Lee Hajun. He was poring over the plans for a new aqueduct and cursing because he couldn't calculate the gradient without precise distance measurements. Amber looked at his drawing. Then she took an instrument out of her bag, a lens, a scale, a sighting device, a homemade theodolite. She had spent 3 years. She said she could measure the distance to any point with an error margin of 1 chi. Lee Hajun looked at the theodolite, then at Amber, then back at the theodolite. He said 2 words. "You're hired." Amber worked until late in the evening, and by nightfall handed him a map of the aqueduct with precise elevation marks. Lee Hajun looked at the map, at the notation system, at how she drew the contour lines. She drew them in a way no one else in the world did, but the way they're drawn in the 21st century. Not exactly like that, but the principle is the same. He asked how she knew about contour lines. She said she'd come up with it herself, that when you look at a mountain from the side, you only see the slope, but if you slice the mountain into layers, you see the shape. He nodded. He didn't say that in his world it was called a topographic map, and that it was 200 years old. He just nodded and said that she was now the head of the cartographic service. Amber's mouth fell open. Her eyes behind her glasses grew huge. She asked if she would have a staff. He said she would, and people, and tools, and a budget. She gestured with her hands for the next hour and a half, explaining to him why her theodolite would change everything. He listened. Rin stood in the doorway and watched them, with an expression that Hanmei later described as that of a person watching 2 children who had found each other on the playground. The end of the first year. A population of 15,000, 4 walls, 4 towers, a market, a hospital, a school, an archive, a blacksmith's quarter, a weaver's quarter, a potter's quarter, 3 wells, an aqueduct, sewer system. Yes, sewer system. The only one on the entire continent. Lee Hajun built it first, after the walls, and Hanmei said that for that alone he should be made emperor. Caravans arrived every week. Merchants, refugees, artisans. People went to the baron who fed them, and Soji Min recorded every one of them, every name, in a journal that grew with each passing day. At the end of the first year, Lee Hajun stood on the tower and looked out over his city. The seal in his chest was warmer than ever. 15,000 dots, bright, alive, his people. He closed his eyes, and then the seal showed him what he had already seen in the underground hub, a map of the continent, 12 dim dots, and his one bright one. But now there was a difference. Thin threads radiated out from his dot in all directions, like the roots of a tree. They stretched across the Dead Steppe to the north, toward the core, which was no longer asleep, which was trembling, slowly, like a heart trying to beat after a long pause. Soji Min was freed from slavery and became the keeper of the archive. Amber Caldwell's son arrived and took charge of the cartographic service. By the end of the first year, Seebach had grown to 15,000 men with a full infrastructure. The seal revealed that threads of energy were stretching toward the core in the north, and it had begun to awaken. The first punitive expedition from Songyeon arrived at the end of the first year. 800 sabers, heavy cavalry, commanded by a young general named Jong Ik-soo. Ambitious, confident. He led his detachment using a map from 20 years ago and did not know that the Dead Steppe had changed. Lee Hajun knew they were coming 3 days before their arrival. The seal showed it. 800 shadows in the southwest, moving fast, on horseback. He called a council, a full council, everyone who had a voice. Cho Byung-hoo said the walls would hold. 15,000 men, 3,000 of them militia. 800 sabers is serious, but not fatal. So Rin said the walls would hold, but there would be casualties. 200, maybe 300. Yun Ka, who by this time was already commanding a cavalry of 200 riders on steppe horses, said she would go out into the field and cut off their supply train. Lee Hajun listened to everyone. Then he said they wouldn't fight. Silence. Cho Byung-hoo began to blush. Yun Ka bared her teeth. So-rin raised an eyebrow. Lee Hajun explained. 800 soldiers are marching across the barren steppe using an old map. They don't know that the wells along their route dried up 10 years ago. They don't know that the road through the gorge was blocked by a landslide 5 years ago. Amber showed him a new map that morning, an accurate one, with every ravine and every dry riverbed. According to the old map, Jung Ik-soo's detachment will march through the place where they expect to find water. There is no water there. They will run out of water 2 days before reaching Sebok's walls. 800 men without water in the Dead Steppe are not an army. It's a caravan of the dying. He fell silent. The council was silent. Then Han Mei said quietly that if he was right, in 2 days there would be 800 people at their walls who needed help. Lee Hajun nodded. He said that was exactly right. She nodded. She said she would set up a field station at the gate. He would need cauldrons. He said the cauldrons would be provided. Cho Byung-hoo was silent. Then he said it was madness, that they were enemies, that they had come to destroy them. Lee Hajun looked at him. He said they were soldiers. They were following orders. The order had come from the Songyeon court. It wasn't the soldiers' fault that they'd been sent to die in the steppe based on an old map. They were just as much people sent to die as those 112 in the first cart. Cho Byung-hoo clenched his jaw. He said nothing, but he stayed. 2 days later, everything happened just as Lee Hajun had predicted. Jung Ik-soo's army reached the walls of Sebok, parched. The horses staggered. The men could barely stay in their saddles. General Jung Ik-soo saw the walls, stone, 3 meters high, towers, guards, and 15,000 men behind the walls. He realized he had been lied to. This was not a dying camp of exiles. This was a city. Lee Hajun came out to the gates, alone, unarmed, with pots of hot porridge on his back. He stood before the general. He said his men had no water, that the nearest spring was 2 days' journey away, that Lee Hajun was offering water and food, no strings attached, no need to surrender their weapons. They could leave at any time. General Jung Ik-soo looked down at him from his horse for a long time. Then he dismounted. Then his men dismounted. Then they ate. 600 out of 800 remained. General Jung Ik-soo, with 200 loyal men, headed back south, without loot, without victory, with a report that would shake the Songyeon court to its core. Lee Hajun watched them go. 600 new points on his map. Soldiers, trained, armed, now his. Not because he had defeated them, because he had fed them. Autumn of the first year. The Songyeon court declared him a heretic who defiled the seal. An information war began. Rumors spread across the continent. The Baron in the north eats people's souls. His crystals are a clump of human lives. His fields grow on bones. Lee Hajun listened to So-rin's reports on the rumors and remained silent. Then he said that the best defense against rumors is an open gate. Let them come. Let them look. Let them see with their own eyes. Whoever wants to stay will stay. Whoever doesn't want to will leave and tell the truth. By the middle of the second year, Sebok's population was 35,000. Yun Ka commanded a cavalry of 800 horsemen. So-rin commanded the intelligence and border guards. Cho Ha-ul, the daughter of Cho Byung-hoo, tall, broad-shouldered, and wielding a halberd, commanded the city guard. Lee Hajun saw her for the first time during training. She was yelling at the recruits so loudly that you could hear her 3 blocks away. He walked over. He said he needed someone who could yell loud enough to be heard 3 blocks away. He asked if she would take the city guard. Ha-il blushed so much that she hid her face behind her sleeve, but she accepted, and she never blushed in front of him again, except for one time when her father Cho Byung-hoo grumbled to her that he had introduced her to the Baron, not as a soldier, but as his daughter. But that was later. Timur Khan arrived in the middle of the second year, 10,000 horsemen, the nomadic Khan, the very one who had slaughtered the Young Ka clan. Lee Hajun had sensed his army a week earlier. 10,000 shadows in the east. Yun Ka came to him at night. She said one word. Him. Lee Hajun nodded. This battle was inevitable. This time, he could not feed the enemy. Timur Khan did not lead hungry soldiers. He led well-fed, angry nomads who were out for plunder. The battle was led by Yun Ka, Sebok's cavalry against the steppe cavalry. Lee Hajun sat in his tent poring over a map and sensed every 100 men. Through the seal, through the network of loyalists, through the squad leaders who were his nerve endings. 3 hours into the battle, he withdrew the 3rd Regiment from the right flank because he sensed they had been without water for too long. The regiment commander did not understand the order. He carried it out. An hour later, Timur Khan's ambush force of 1,000 struck the spot where the 3rd Regiment had stood, into an empty space. The blow vanished into thin air. Yun Ka turned her cavalry around and struck the ambush from the flank. Timur Khan was defeated 2 hours later. For 3 days, Yun Ka remained silent. She was making her decision. Timur Khan sat in captivity. Lee Hajun waited. He had left the decision to her. On the 3rd day, she came. She said he should build roads. 20 years. She would be checking up on him. Timur Khan heard the sentence. He laughed quietly. He said that the Baron had won because he had 100 men who wanted to win for him. But Timur Khan had 10,000 who wanted to win for themselves. Different math, but it works too, just slower. The first punitive detachment from Songyeon was stopped without a fight, and 600 soldiers defected to Lee Hajun's side. The court declared him a heretic. Timur Khan attacked with 10,000 and was defeated thanks to the SEAL's tactics. Yun Ka sentenced him to 20 years of road construction. The end of the 2nd year, a population of 60,000, 3 satellite cities around Sabok. A network of wells stretched 200 li to the north, and the Dead Steppe was retreating, literally. Where the wells ran, the earth came to life. Grass, bushes, flowers, slender trees with white bark that no one remembered. They grew where nothing had grown for 200 years. Amber updated the map every week. The green border advanced northward by 5 li a month. Lee Hajun stood on the northern wall of Seb and looked at the green strip stretching to the horizon. Once there'd been a dead steppe here, gray, empty, remembering betrayal. Now grass grew here, and children ran in that grass. His children, the children of his city. He looked at the green sprout at the base of the wall, small, stubborn, having broken through the stone. The first sprout on the ground where nothing had grown for 200 years. He dropped to his knees, he touched it, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he wept. Not from grief, not from joy, from the magnitude of it all, from the fact that it works, that the earth responds, that the dead come to life if you care for them properly. Rin stood behind him, silently. She didn't approach. She gave him a moment. Then she came closer. She stood beside him. She said they would come by winter. He wiped his face. He asked who. She said everyone. The 3 princes and the nomadic alliance. 40,000 sabers. A coalition. He nodded. He knew. The seal had been showing movement in the south for 2 months now. Shadows were gathering. Many. So Rin asked quietly what would happen. He said there would be winter, and then there would be spring. She looked at him. For the first time in a year and a half by his side, she allowed herself to touch his hand. Not with her palm, with the back of her fingers, briefly, as if by accident. He didn't pull his hand away. They stood side by side on the wall. Between them lay the width of a palm and a year and a half of working together, of silent trust, and of night watches under a single cloak, and that was more than words. The winter of the 2nd year. 40,000 sabers marched up to the walls of Sebok. 3 princes, a nomadic alliance. Lee Hajun stood on the tower and sensed them. 40,000 dots, not his, strangers, but the seal showed them anyway, faintly, blurred, but enough to understand. They were frozen, hungry, angry, far from home. They were brought here not because they wanted to. They were brought because their princes were afraid. Afraid of the Baron who proved that the land belongs not to the one with the longest lineage, but to the one whose people are fed. That was more dangerous than any army. It was more dangerous than any magic. It was an idea, and you can't kill an idea with a saber. The first night of the siege, Lee Hajun didn't sleep. He walked the walls, checked the posts, talked to the militiamen, calmly, steadily. He told everyone the same thing. We will hold out, not because we're stronger, because they're waiting for us at home. The second night, the nomads launched an assault on the southern wall. Cho-Ha-il stood in the breach with a halberd. 30 guards stood beside her. The end of the 2nd year, a population of 60,000, 3 satellite towns around Sabok, each with its own well, with its own wall, with its own foreman from the network of loyalists who understood the people just as Lee Hajun did, not as deeply, but enough to know when someone was sick, when someone was hungry, when someone was on the brink. The network worked. No paperwork, no messengers, no bureaucracy. An order from Lee Hajun reached the farthest foreman in a minute, not in words, in feeling, in intent. The foreman sensed what was needed and acted. 60,000 people were managed as a single organism. The network of wells stretched 200 li to the north, and the Dead Steppe receded. Where the wells passed, the earth came to life. First it darkened, then it grew moist, then grass sprouted from it, then bushes, then slender trees with white bark, the likes of which hadn't been seen on this land for 200 years. Amber updated the map every week. She now had 6 assistants and 3 theodolites. She taught them so fiercely and so quickly that Lee Hajun suspected the resonance of the seal. The green border advanced northward by 5 li a month. It was impossible. By all the laws of this world, land poisoned by the War of the Mages could not come back to life in 2 years. It was supposed to lie dead for centuries to come. But the seal knew no laws of this world. It knew only one law: prosperity begets prosperity. 60,000 people who were well fed thousands of crystals a day. The crystals went into the wells nourished the land, the earth came back to life. As it revived, it yielded more food. More food brought more prosperity yielded more crystals. An exponential curve, the very one Lee Hajun had seen as early as the 4th day. Only now, it wasn't operating on a scale of 100 people, on a scale of 60,000. Lee Hajun stood on the northern wall of Sibak and looked at the green strip stretching to the horizon. For the first time in 2 years, the wind from the north didn't smell of dust and ash. It smelled of grass, wet earth, life. So Rin stood beside him. She always stood beside him when he went out onto the wall, not because he asked her to, because she decided to. Over the past year and a half, a bond had formed between them that needed no words. Shared night watches, one cloak for 2 when the wind was too strong, a silence that didn't weigh on them, a glance across the square as he left the council building. She always knew where he was. He always knew where she was. Point 112 on his map glowed brighter than all the others, not because Sorin is the happiest of his people, because she is the only one who chose him twice, the first time when she stayed, the second time every day after that. He looked at the green sprout at the base of the wall, small, stubborn, having broken through the stone, delicate leaves on a slender stem, the first sprout on ground where nothing had grown for 200 years. He dropped to his knees, touched it. The leaves were soft, alive, warm from the sun. And then it all came over him, all at once. The cart, dirty feet on his stomach, a girl with an empty bowl, the guard who waited for his death, 112 dull, hungry eyes, the first well, the first crystal, wet sand in Grandpa Kim's hands, Suni who had stopped crying, Cho Byung-hoo who gave away his ration, the first dugout, the first fire, the children who slept without outer clothing, So-rin with a bow at the gate, Tae-seong with his first knife, Moon with his hands all cut up, building a wall, Han-mei with her hands all red, crying in the corner of the hospital, Yoon-ka with her eyes all yellow, drinking broth with trembling hands, Amber with her theodolite that changes everything, So-ji-min who spent an hour opening and closing her first door, a boy without shoes, with frostbitten toes, who asked, "Have you eaten today?" "No," to whom he asked, "Have you eaten today?" And the boy shook his head. And Lee Hajun said, "Bring some warm porridge with butter." Everything, all at once. 2 years, 730 days, one task every day. And from this grew a green field on dead ground, and a sprout by the wall, and 60,000 living people. Lee Hajun knelt before the little sprout and wept, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, not from grief, not from joy, from the magnitude of it, from the fact that it works, that the earth responds, that the dead come back to life if you care for them, not in general, but specifically, not for everyone, but for each person. So Rin stood behind him, silently. She didn't approach him. She gave him time, as much as he needed. She knew there were moments when a person needed to be alone with their tears, because these tears were honest, and they couldn't be interrupted. Then she approached, stood beside him, didn't say a word, just placed her hand on his shoulder, briefly, like that gesture with the back of her fingers, their language, without words. He stood up, wiped his face, looked at her. She said they would arrive by winter. He nodded. He knew. The seal had been showing movement in the south for 2 months now. Shadows were gathering. 3 princes, a nomadic alliance that had gathered the remnants of its forces after the defeat of Temirkan. So Rin's intelligence reported the details. Prince Songyun had placed General Zhang Iksu at the head of the coalition, the very same man who, a year and a half ago, had led 800 sabers and left with nothing. Now he had been given 40,000, and new maps, and a supply train for 2 months, and orders not to return until Sebiok was burned to the ground. Lee Hajun listened to the reports. He didn't interrupt. Then he convened a council, a large one, all the commanders, So Rin, Yunka, Cho Ha-il, Cho Byung-hu, Grandpa Kim, who was now the senior advisor and never left the council chamber without his pipe, Han Mei, Amber, Kang Jae-woo, Soji Min, who was writing down every word, and new faces, the captains of the satellite cities, the regimental commanders, the district chiefs, 30 people around a table with a map that Amber had drawn that morning, precise, with every ravine, every stream, every trail, 12,000 men capable of bearing arms, against 40,000, 3 to 1. By all the rules of this world, this is the end. Cho Byung-hu said they had to strike first, draw out Yunka's cavalry, and attack on the march before they could deploy. Yunka nodded. Her eyes were ablaze. So Rin said they could lure them into a trap, lead them into a gorge on the old road where only 2x2 columns could pass. Han Mei was silent. She didn't speak at war councils, but Lee Hajun saw her face. She was thinking of the wounded, of the thousands of wounded there would be after any battle, friends and foes alike. She was already counting bandages and herbs and beds. Lee Hajun listened. Then he raised his hand. Silence. He said he didn't know yet, that a decision would be made, but not today, that he needed to think. The council fell silent. They were used to it. The Baron thinks, sometimes for an hour, sometimes a day, sometimes a night, and then he speaks, and it always works. They dispersed. Lee Hajun remained alone in the hall. No, not alone. Soji Min remained. She always stayed, quiet, with a quill behind her ear. She didn't ask questions. She just stayed close by, in case he said something that needed to be written down. He sat and thought. 40,000 people, not shadows, people. Everyone has a mother, or a daughter, or a son waiting at home. They were sent here not because they hate Sebiok, but because their princes hate the idea that the land belongs to the one who feeds the people. The soldiers aren't to blame. They are never to blame. He stood up, went out onto the wall. Night. Winter was already breathing in from the north. Cold. The stars were foreign, just like on the first night. He stood on the wall until dawn. The seal pulsed in his chest. Warm, steady, 80,000 dots behind him, alive, well-fed, warm, his people, and 40,000 shadows to the south, strangers, hungry, cold, someone else's people too. Toward morning he climbed down, found Sorin in the barracks, woke her up. She woke instantly, hand on the knife, a habit. She looked at him. He said he knew what to do. She asked what. He said something they weren't expecting. She sat up on the bed, looked at him in the dark, for a long time. Then she said she trusted him, whatever it was. He nodded, left. He found Han Mei at the hospital. She hadn't been sleeping. She was sitting over a list of medicines, counting. He told her to set up a field hospital, a large one, for 5,000 people, for her own people and for strangers. She looked up at him. She was silent. Then she asked quietly, how many cauldrons? He said 300. She nodded. She stood up. She began to gather supplies. Winter of the second year, 40,000 sabers marched to the walls of Sebiok. A coalition of 3 princes and the remnants of the nomadic alliance. General Zhang Iksu led them skillfully, not by the old maps, by the new ones. 2 months' worth of supplies, water in canteens. The wells along the route had been scouted in advance. He had learned from the mistakes of the past. But he had overlooked one thing. He hadn't considered that Lee Hajun had no intention of fighting. The army set up camp 3 li from the walls. Tents, campfires, 40,000 lights in the night steppe. Lee Hajun stood on the tower and watched. The view showed everyone. Blurry, but enough. Frozen, tired. 2 months of marching across the Dead Steppe, even with a supply train, meant 2 months of cold and dust and homesickness. The first night of the siege, he didn't sleep. He walked along the walls, checking the posts, talking to the militiamen, calmly, steadily. He told everyone the same thing. We will hold out. Not because we are stronger, because they are waiting for us at home. The second night, the nomads launched an assault on the southern wall. 3,000 foot soldiers supported by archers. Arrows rained down. One grazed the palm of Lee Hajun's hand. He didn't flinch, not because he was brave, because he hadn't noticed. He was looking at the map in his head, counting points. Choha-il, with a halberd, stood in the breach where the battering ram had smashed through the masonry 1/2 meter wide. 30 guards nearby. She was screaming so loud it could be heard across the entire city, not out of fear. Orders. Clear, short, here, there, hold, don't let them through. Hanmei was bandaging the wounded, right on the wall, under the arrows. Her hands were covered in blood up to her elbows. Clean. She washed them after every wounded person, boiled water in a flask on her belt, even under the arrows. So Rin was shooting from the tower. Every arrow hit its mark, not a person. The ladder, the battering ram, the rope. She wasn't killing, she was cutting them off, depriving them of their tools, because Lee Hajun had told her one thing before the siege. If possible, don't kill, we'll need them alive tomorrow. She didn't understand it then, but she obeyed. The assault was repelled by dawn. 17 wounded, no dead, neither among her own, nor among the enemy. So Rin disabled 3 battering rams and cut 12 ladder ropes. Not a single person on the other side died from her arrows. That was impossible for an archer of her caliber. For her, it was a choice. Cho Byung-hoo stood beside his daughter after the battle. She was covered in blood, not her own. One of the guards had been wounded next to her, and she was pressing her hand against his wound until Hanmei ran up. Cho Byung-hoo silently embraced his daughter, briefly, like a soldier. She didn't cry. She didn't blush. She nodded. She went to plug the gap. He watched her go. An old soldier. 3 wars. 6 commanders. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for the Baron. He was fighting for his daughter, and that was stronger than any oath. The third night, Lee Hajun went out onto the wall alone, without an entourage. The seal on his chest was warmer than ever, because the whole city was working behind him, not waiting, working. Blacksmiths were forging, not swords, cauldrons. 300 cauldrons. Hanmei was in charge at the hospital, preparing it not for defense, but for receiving patients. Oh Dan-bi was opening the winter grain reserves. A lot. A great deal. Kang Jae-woo stood beside her and counted. His face was gray from the numbers, but he counted, because the Baron had told him to count. Children carried water to the cauldrons. The old men chopped wood. Grandfather Kim sat by the well with a sword on his lap. He is 70. The sword was rusty. His hands didn't tremble. Suni brought him porridge, just like every evening. He took the bowl and looked at the girl. He said quietly that he was proud of her. Suni smiled and ran on, toward the walls, to the wounded. Everyone needs porridge. Lee Hajun looked at the besiegers' camp. 40,000 lights. 40,000 hungry, frozen people far from home. And then he made a decision, that very one. The one that would go down in Ryojun's history as the Open Gate Edict. The Dead Steppe came to life 200 li north of Sabok, thanks to the crystals and wells. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, Lee Hajun wept upon seeing the green sprout on the dead earth. A coalition of 40,000 laid siege to the city. 2 night assaults were repelled without any casualties. On the third night, Lee Hajun made the decision regarding the Open Gate Edict. He climbed down from the wall at 4 in the morning. It was dark, cold. The stars burned brightly and indifferently. He walked through the city toward the council building and felt the seal beating in his chest, steady and calm, as if it knew what he had decided, as if it had been waiting. He entered the hall, lit a candle, sat down at the table, took a piece of charcoal and a small tablet, and wrote the order. 8 words: open the gates, bring out the porridge, feed everyone. Then he signed it. Then he sat and stared at the tablet. 8 words that would either save 100,000 people or kill 80,000. He knew he was taking a risk. He knew Cho Byung-hoo would call him a madman. He knew half the council would be up in arms. But he knew something else. He knew the people behind the wall, not personally, but through the seal. He had sensed them for 3 nights, 40,000 shadows. And with each passing night, the shadows grew clearer. Hunger, cold, despair, fear. Not the fear of battle, the fear of people who don't understand why they're here, who were torn from their homes and families and driven across the Dead Steppe to fight a city that had done them no harm. These people had no hatred. They had an order, and an order is not hatred. An order is a chain, and a chain can be broken, not with a sword, with a bowl of porridge. He stood up, went out, found Cho Byung-hoo, woke him up, showed him the note. Cho Byung-hoo read it, turned pale, said it was suicide, that they would be slaughtered, that 40,000 armed men would pour through the open gates, and in an hour there would be nothing left of the city. Lee Hajun looked at him, calmly. He said one thing, remember the first cart. Cho Byung-hoo fell silent. Lee Hajun continued, 112 people sent to die, among them, you, your daughter, grandfather Kim, Suni, all of us. We were sent to die too, and what saved us? Not a sword, not a wall, a well, water, porridge, care. Out there beyond the walls are 40,000 people just like us. They were sent too, not for water, for someone else's pride, for the fear of princes who are afraid the world will change. These soldiers aren't enemies, they're hostages, just as we were hostages in that cart. Cho Byung-hoo was silent for a long time. He looked at the tablet, then at Lee Hajun, then at the tablet. Then he said quietly that the Baron was either the greatest ruler Ryogyeong had ever seen, or the greatest madman. Lee Hajun smiled. He said it was most likely both. Cho Byung-hoo nodded. He went to give the order. He didn't agree, but he carried it out. Because over the past 2 years, he had learned to trust the bridge, to step on every plank. Not a single one had failed him. The council gathered an hour before dawn. Lee Hajun spoke briefly. We open all 4 gates. We roll 300 cauldrons of hot porridge outside the walls. Tables with tea. Heralds ride to the camp with a single message. Baron Lee Hajun invites the weary to eat. No strings attached. You don't have to surrender your weapons. You can leave at any time. Silence. Then everyone spoke at once. Yun Ka snarled that this was a trap for them, that the nomads would enter and slaughter the city, that she'd seen them do it, that her clan had perished that way. They opened the gates to those who came in peace, and by morning 300 people lay dead. Her voice trembled. Not from anger, from memory. Lee Hajun looked at her. He said quietly that he knew, that he remembered, that her clan had perished because they'd opened the gates to liars. But behind these walls, there were no liars. Behind these walls were boys who had been taken from the villages and who were freezing for the 3rd night. Yun Ka clenched her fists. She pressed her ears back. Her tail wrapped around the leg of a chair. She was silent. Then she said she would stand at the 2nd gate, on horseback, with a sword. If even one of them raised a weapon, she would kill him before he took a step. Lee Hajun nodded. He said that was fair. Soden didn't say a word at the council meeting. She stood up silently and left. 10 minutes later, she returned in full gear, a bow, 2 quivers, a knife on her belt. She stood by the wall. She looked at Lee Hajun. He understood. She would be at the 1st gate, not to attack. For him, if anything went wrong, she would cover his retreat, even if it cost her her life. He knew that. She knew that he knew. They didn't discuss it between themselves. Han Mei said the field hospital was ready. 5,000 beds, bandages, herbs, boiled water, for friends and foes alike. She said it calmly, like a fact. A sick person is never an enemy. They are only sick. Cho Ha-il stood up and said she was taking the 3rd gate, halberd on her shoulder. Her voice was steady. She didn't discuss it. She carried it out, like a soldier, like a soldier's daughter, like a woman who had been told that this was her profession, not a diagnosis. Amber raised her hand. She said she would be on the tower with a spyglass. She would count those entering, every single one. Lee Hajun nodded. Soji Min raised her quill. She said she would be in the square, with a journal, every name. He looked at her. A 17-year-old girl who 2 years ago had stood with her head bowed, not daring to meet his gaze. Now she sat upright, quill in hand, the journal in front of her, the keeper of the city's memory for 100,000. Without her signature, no decree was considered recorded. She no longer remembered how to walk with her head bowed. Dawn. The gates opened. 4 openings in the stone wall. So Rin was among the first, bowstring drawn, face calm. Yun Ka was among the second, on horseback, sword drawn. Her ears were pricked, her nostrils flared. She could sense every scent in the winter air. Cho Ha-il was in the 3rd group, a halberd on her shoulder, as straight as the wall behind her. Han Mei was in the 4th group, a white bandage on her sleeve. Behind her were 10 doctors, stretchers, cauldrons of hot water, herbs, bandages. A field hospital set up as if for war, only without the war. Behind the gates were cauldrons, 300 of them. Taeseong had forged them for 2 weeks. Each held enough porridge for 100 people. Steam rose into the icy air. The smell of hot food wafted across the steppe. Danby stood by the cauldrons. She was directing the distribution. Her voice sounded just as it did when she directed the harvest, steady, confident. Women with ladles stood at the ready. Dawn bathed the steppe in pink. The besiegers' camp was clearly visible. Tents, extinguished campfires, dark figures between them. The heralds reached the first outposts. They spoke their words. Their voices carried clearly and far through the frosty air. Baron Lee Hajun invites the weary to eat. No strings attached. You need not surrender your weapons. You may leave at any time. Silence. Lee Hajun stood on the wall and watched. He sensed it. 40,000 shadows froze. Confusion, distrust, fear, hope, all at once. Like the 112 dots on the first day in the cart, only 400 times more. 1 minute, 5, 10. Cho Byung-hoo stood below at the gate, holding his breath. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword. He trusted the Baron, but a soldier's body cannot trust completely. A soldier's body is always ready. Sorin didn't blink. The bowstring was taut. Her fingers were white. Yun-ka on horseback didn't move. Only her ears turned, catching sounds. 20 minutes. And then a figure broke away from the camp. One. Small. Slow. An infantryman, about 17 years old. He had a crooked pike in his hand and frostbitten cheeks with white patches on his cheekbones. He was walking toward the first gate, step by step. Alone in the empty space between the camp and the walls, hundreds of eyes on both sides watched him. He approached the gate. He saw Sorin with her bow drawn. He stopped. He looked at her, then past her at the pot of porridge from which steam was rising, then at her again. Then he dropped his pike. It fell onto the snow with a dull thud. He sat down in the snow right in front of the gate. He wrapped his arms around his knees and began to cry. Quietly, silently. He just sat there and cried. A boy, 17 years old, who had been taken from his village and driven for 2 months across the Dead Steppe, and he didn't understand why. Rin watched him. 5 seconds, 10. Then she slowly loosened the bowstring, lowered the bow, took a step back. Han Mei emerged from behind the fourth gate, walked along the wall, approached the boy. She knelt down beside him. She lifted him up, took his hand, led him to the cauldron. She poured out some porridge, hot, with butter. She gave him a spoon. He took it and ate, and cried, at the same time. Han Mei stood nearby and waited, just as Lee Hajun had waited beside Yun-ka at the hospital. Because sometimes a person doesn't need medicine. They need someone to stand by their side. The first was followed by a second, then a third, then 10, then 50. At first, one by one, then in pairs, then in groups. They left their weapons at the gate, not all of them. Some entered with swords. No one stopped them. They sat down by the cauldrons. They ate, in silence. Some cried, some laughed. Some just sat and looked at the city around them, at the houses, at the workshops, at the children running between the cauldrons and carrying bowls. At Suni, who, 12 years old and serious, approached every newcomer with a full bowl and said, "Eat, then we'll talk, the Baron's rule." Amber on the tower kept count. A voice from the tower sounded every half hour. 1,000, 2,000, 3, 5, 8. Soji Min was writing names in the square. She asked everyone who approached her table one thing: "What is your name?" And she wrote it down. The pen scratched across the paper. The journal grew, page after page, name after name. She couldn't keep up. Her fingers ached. She didn't stop. By noon, 15,000 had passed through the gates. The cauldrons emptied and were filled again. Danby had rallied all the women of the city. 30 bonfires in the square. Grain from the winter reserves was flowing out like a river. Kang Jae-woo stood next to Lee Hajun and said that if this continued, the reserves would last a month. Lee Hajun said they would. Kang Jae-woo looked at him. He wanted to object. He didn't, because sitting around him were 15,000 people who an hour ago had been enemies and were now eating his porridge and had no intention of killing anyone. The numbers on Kang Jae-woo's tablet didn't describe this, but he saw it. By evening, the coalition had fallen apart. Commanders sent messengers. The messengers entered the gates. They ate the porridge. They didn't return. General Jang Ik-soo rode up to the gates in person, on horseback, in full armor. He wanted to give the order to return to the ranks. He saw 20,000 of his own soldiers sitting around pots of porridge. Next to them sat the townspeople of Seebach, children, women, old people, unarmed, unafraid. The general sat on his horse and watched. Then he dismounted. Then he took off his helmet. Then he walked over to a pot. Then they poured him some. Then he ate, standing, in full armor, with his mustache in the porridge. So Rin stood next to him and said nothing. The general finished eating, set down the bowl, looked at her, said that in 20 years of service he had been defeated by the sword, by the spear, by arrows, by ambush, by cunning, but this was the first time he'd been defeated by porridge. So Rin replied that porridge was a weapon too. It's just that you don't need a hospital after eating it. The general blinked, then he laughed, loudly. For the first time in 2 months, one of the princes retreated during the night. He took those who still obeyed him, 3,000 out of 10. The remaining 7 stayed by the cauldrons. The second prince retreated by morning. Even fewer went with him. The third prince, the oldest in the coalition, came to the gates alone, without an entourage, without weapons, without armor. An old man of about 70, with a white beard and weary eyes. He found Lee Hajun in the square. Lee Hajun was standing by the cauldron, serving out the porridge himself. He couldn't just stand and watch. His hands had to be busy. He's always like that. When the tension gets too much, his hands save him. Ladle, bowl, next. Ladle, bowl, next. The prince approached. He stood opposite him. Lee Hajun looked up. He looked at the old man. The prince said he didn't understand, that according to all the laws of Ryogyeon, the baron was supposed to fight, to win or die, not to stand by the cauldron with a ladle and feed his enemies, that this went everything he had known in his 70 years of life. Lee Hajun set down the ladle, wiped his hands on his apron, looked at the prince, said that the laws of Ryogyeon were written by those who benefited from people fighting, and he writes different ones. The prince asked what kind. Lee Hajun said simple ones: feed the hungry, give fire to the frozen, heal the sick, and then ask his name. The prince was silent for a long time. He looked out at the square around him, at the 20,000 former soldiers sitting alongside the townspeople, eating from the same cauldrons, at the children running between them, at Han Mei, who was bandaging the frostbitten cheeks of the young infantryman, that very first one, at Tae Sun, who was explaining to 3 enemy blacksmiths why his anvil was better, and they listened with their mouths agape, at Yun Ka, who finally dismounted and fed her horse by the well next to the nomads who were feeding theirs. No one was fighting. No one was shouting. Just people, side by side. Then the prince bowed, low, not to the baron, to the city. He turned and left. Lee Hajun took a ladle. Next, Temirkan sat in his cell. They brought him porridge too, like everyone else. He ate and laughed quietly. The guard asked what was so funny. Temirkan said he had warned them. Different math. It's just that no one listens to a captive Wang. Lee Hajun didn't leave the wall all night. The city below didn't sleep. Bonfires burned at every intersection. Newcomers mingled with the old-timers. Han Mei treated the frostbitten until dawn and didn't stop. She walked the walls with Rin, keeping watch over the steppe, just in case any of the departed princes returned. No one returned. Young Ka led horse patrols around the walls, every hour. She made sure no one froze out on the steppe. She found 12 people who had fallen asleep in the snow on the road from the camp to the gates. She picked them up, brought them back, handed them over to Han Mei. Everyone survived. Cho Ha-il assigned people to quarters with a voice that made the walls tremble. Every block, every house, every available square foot. People lay down on the floors, on benches, on stairs, crowded, but warm. Amber, up in the tower, didn't take her eyes off the spyglass. She counted until the very end. The final number, 23,417. She went down to Lee Hajun at dawn and gave him the number. He nodded. Taeseong had been forging nails all night, for new barracks, new houses, new workshops. The hammering never stopped, steady, rhythmic, like the city's heartbeat. Grandpa Kim sat by the well, with a sword on his lap, 70 years old, a rusty sword, a pipe between his teeth. He wouldn't give up his well to anyone. Suni sat next to him, tired. She'd run around all day, a bowl in her hands, full. She fell asleep, nestled against Grandpa Kim's shoulder. He didn't move, so as not to wake her. Before dawn, Soji Min climbed the wall, small, quiet, a quill behind her ear. a journal pressed to her chest, her hands covered in ink up to her elbows. Her fingers trembled with fatigue. She approached Lee Hajun. She handed him a cup of hot tea. She said quietly that 23,417 new names had been recorded in the archives today, that she couldn't keep up with the writing, that her finger had gone numb, that she needed helpers. Lee Hajun took the cup. His hands were frozen. The porcelain burned his fingers. He didn't let go. He warmed his palms. He looked at his city, at the dawn rising over the steppe. The steppe was white with snow, but he knew that beneath the snow lay green earth, alive, awakened, and it stretched northward toward the core, which was trembling beneath the earth with increasing intensity. He could feel it. Distant, warm, waiting. 130,000 dots were glowing on his map, 80,000 old ones, 23,000 new ones. Each dim new dot grew brighter with every passing minute. Someone had eaten. Someone's frostbitten cheeks were bandaged. Someone fell asleep in the warmth for the first time in 2 months. Every moment like that yielded a crystal. Thousands of crystals in a single night. The seal in his chest sang, quietly, steadily, like a lullaby. He took a sip of tea. He looked at Soji Min, said he was fine, that he'd help tomorrow. She nodded, didn't leave, stood beside him, a pen behind her ear, a notebook pressed to her chest, ready to write. Everything. Always. Because memory is the only thing that cannot be taken away. Because every name is a life, and every life deserves to be recorded. Dawn flooded the walls with gold, the city of Seebach. Dawn. The name he gave it because every morning the sun rises here, and it smells of porridge, and people go to work, and children laugh. Lee Hajun stood on the wall. 2 years ago, he lay in a cart beneath strangers' dirty feet, and the stranger's sky was the color of dirty tin. 112 people, 2 sacks of millet, 1 cow, 8 axes, and a girl with an empty bowl who was crying because not a single adult nearby knew what to do. Now the girl is 12, the bowl is full, she isn't crying, she's feeding others, and he stands on the wall of a city of 100,000, a city that grew from a single well and a single bowl of porridge. Because an empire doesn't begin with a throne, it begins with a question: have you eaten today? He finished his tea. He set the cup on the stone wall. His men stood beside him, So-rin on the left, a bow on his back. For the first time in 2 years, the bowstring was not drawn, because there was no need to shoot this morning. Soji Min on the right, with a journal, with ink-stained fingers, with his back straight. Below, the city breathed, smoke from chimneys, the clang of a hammer, Cho Ha-il's voice echoing over the neighborhoods, Suni's laughter by the well, Grandpa Kim's snoring as he finally fell asleep, Han Mei's whisper over the wounded man, the creak of Amber's theodolite, Yun Ka's growl at the negligent stable hand, Kang Jae-woo's quiet voice counting supplies, and the hammering of Taeson. Always the hammering, the city's heartbeat. Lee Hajun looked north. The Dead Steppe waited. The core waited. An ancient civilization waited. Years lay ahead. The revelation of the seal's secret, the awakening of the core, the restoration of the world. He knew this was only the beginning, the first arch of many. But today, at this moment, on this wall, in the golden light of dawn, with a cup of cold tea on the stone, he allowed himself a single thought, a quiet one, in the Korean of his past life, as familiar as morning coffee, which doesn't exist in this world, but it will, someday. The thought was simple. I didn't build an empire. I built a place where Grandpa Kim's hands don't tremble, and that's enough. To start. He straightened up, turned toward the stairs. Time to go down. Down there are 23,000 new people who need to be settled, fed, clothed, and registered by name. To give everyone a job, to give everyone a home, to give each one a reason to stay. Just another day, like all 730 before it, and all that will come after. One task every day, today's, to build tomorrow. He stepped onto the stairs and began to descend, a warm weight in his chest, the city alive behind him, the step waiting ahead. A step, another step, down, toward the people, toward the work, toward the porridge in the cauldrons, toward the names in the logbook, toward the morning that is just. Dawn over Seebach, dawn over the dead steppe that is no longer dead, dawn.